Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds. Lawrence?
Welcome to the Crafter's Corner, the live stream that's all about taking a break.
The cultists of Great Cthulhu often worship him through depraved and orgiastic voodoo rituals, performed as an indescribably grotesque mask of naked human abnormality, braying, bellowing, and writhing in the moonlight.
That's what we should do.
To make time for creativity and crafting. Whether you're a wargamer, game master, RPG player, model maker, cosplayer, costumer, or creative crafter of any kind, you're welcome here.
And I always confuse Monet and Manet. Now, which one married his mistress?
Monet.
Right, and then Manet had syphilis.
They also painted occasionally.
Maybe you have a few hundred, or maybe a few thousand unpainted miniatures laying around your house. Now would be a great time to pick them up, grab a paintbrush, and a few bottles of paint. Let's get those miniatures painted, whether you just need that one perfectly painted miniature for your D&D character, a band of orcs to pit against your PCs, a custom warband for Frostgrave or Mordheim, or even a whole new Warhammer army. Let's get to work on it. And you know what? Now would also be a great time for a glass of your favorite beverage to enjoy while we work.
Captain Kirk, I thought Romulan ale was illegal.
One of the advantages of being 1,000 light years from Federation headquarters.
Or maybe you need some terrain for your table. No problem. Now would be a great time for cutting foam, flocking bases, scratch building something cool, and just painting something awesome. Not only will we have a good time here, but it just might make your next game night that much better.
To do this, we are going to need a greenstone idol of Cthulhu.
Yes, Ben, you may speak.
I can make it. I majored in art for a semester.
That's great, Ben. No special skills are necessary here, as long as we're having fun. That's all that matters. Maybe you've got a model that you want to build. Maybe there's a model of the Starship Enterprise or of a Klingon warbird that's still sitting in its box. Well, now would be a great time to open it up and see what it would take to get it done. Have you poured your drink yet?
What's that? This, my friend, is a pint. It comes in pints?
Oh. I'm getting one.
What about cosplay? Need some extra time to work on your next great costume? Now is the time to break out the sewing machine, the fabric, the thread, crafting foam, and maybe even some warbler. That all sounds great to me. Let's see what we can create.
Human spider.
So grab your paints, brushes, thread, crafting foam, fabric, or whatever it might be that you need to create what you want to have for your next game session or your next convention, or maybe just what you need to have a little bit of fun tonight doing something creative.
I now do what other people only dream. I make art until someone dies. See? I am the world's first fully functioning homicidal artist.
Come on in for a bit of fellowship and camaraderie, because now it's time for the Crafter's Corner. Let's make something great.
My transformation into a deep one has finally begun. Father Dagon be praised.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Friday night live stream. Tonight, we are having a Crafter's Corner. It has been a while. I have been trying to get these miniatures painted up because I've got my brother wants to play Kings of War games, and we're going to try to get my nephews involved in Kings of War. And so I've been trying to get all these miniatures painted up, and I didn't get to do that last Sunday, do a Crafter's Corner last Sunday because it's been a while. But and you know, I wanted to do a dinner and a board game tonight, but my office is just covered with basically junk. I got books stacked up for role-playing games that I've been referencing as I've been writing RPGs. I've got paints all over this side of the desk with all these miniatures, and I was like, okay, oh my God, I'm just not ready to do a dinner and a board game tonight. But you know what we could do? We could go ahead and do a Crafter's Corner. So this is the time for creativity. Get out your paint brushes, get out your paints, get out your fabric, get out your foam, Get out your sculpting. If you're sculpting miniatures, whatever it is, this is the time for creativity. And we're also going to be talking about realism in RPG combat tonight. So who we got here? Let's see. We got all kinds of people here already tonight. I am so glad to have everybody. It is great. Yes, James, Daniel said James is here. Says, oh, it's Crafter's Corner. Oh, yes, this is Crafter's Corner tonight. Daniel says, oh, thank goodness. I don't understand this. Oh, thank goodness. The little redundant emote bubble blocking part of the chat is gone. I don't understand what that is, but okay, I'm glad it's gone. Let's see. James is here. Stray is here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's see. Good evening, Robert. Robert is here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Sable Phoenix is here saying it's James Bacon. It is. He is here. Zero the Blade is here. Welcome, Zero the Blade. Thank you so much. Channel members. Mad 582 is here. Protein shake. Steel Mongoose is here. I have a protein shake ready to go. Do we breathe and sip in the evenings? I tell you what, let's do it. We should totally breathe and sip this evening. And in fact, I know exactly who we should breathe and sip to, and that is to Tomocrat. Tomocrat says, whoa, just made it. Did a trial run at Hero Quest and got my bum whooped. Oh. Well, you know what? In the Ravenkeep Discord, so in the Ravenkeep Discord, let me go ahead and put the link here just in case you are finding us for the first time. If you'd like to be part of the Ravenkeep Discord, we have conversations there, and it is the best place to know when we're going live, when things are happening. The Ravenkeep Discord is here, and in fact, the Ravenkeep Discord welcome channel just told me that about 5 minutes before this started, that Tomocrat, you joined the channel as a member, and I really appreciate that. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to breathe and sip to Tomocrat. I was saying, I just got this. So I've got some Jack tonight. I have some Jack Daniels whiskey tonight. And for any new channel member who joins tonight, you will get a shot. All right, so don't let me miss anybody. If for some reason I miss somebody or something like that, don't let me miss that. But you know what? You count, Tomocrat, because you joined 5 minutes before this started. So I tell you what, let's breathe and sip. I got my Luxembourg shot glass here, so I'm going to pour a shot. This is to you, Tomocrat. So any new channel members tonight get a shot. And I'm thinking about inviting Knights of the Geekverse on. I will invite Knights of the Geekverse on to have the discussion about realism and RPGs after we go through what we're going to be looking at with John Clements today. So, all right, let's breathe and sip, and then let's do a shot to Tomocrat. So here we go. Deep inhales, complete exhales, and then take a shot of your favorite beverage. So here we go. To Tomocrat. There we go. All right. Breathe and sip. James says, Red Bull, are we going to have orgiastic revelry? Well, that's up to everybody. You can have it if you want it. Oh, Sable Phoenix has got Guinness ready to go. James, I do have the headphones on, and that's because this show is the most technically complicated of the shows that I do, which is not all that technically complicated. But we're going to be watching the discussion of the RPG. And so I have to, because of the way the technology goes and the software that I use, it's complicated to make sure that I can hear the show and also send it out to you guys. I think I remember. It's been a while since I've done the show, so I think I got the audio set up right. But if for some reason you can't hear the audio when the show when the stream on the RPG Realism and RPG Combat starts playing, let me know, because I think I got it all right. But if you can't hear it, obviously let me know, and then I will go and reconfigure audio. But I think I got it right. Well, all right. That's a completely legitimate way to go. Arc Knight, no plastic painting. So there we go. Pre-painted miniatures are good. Daniel says the emote button doesn't appear on my side, your side, but it blocked the latest message with a quick emote response. I could choose if it were ever relevant instead of going through the emote menu. It was dumb. Okay, I don't know anything about that. Okay, all right. So let's see. I have got. I'm trying to finish. I'll bring up before we actually get started here. Nope, cancel. Before we get started with our discussion, let's go ahead and bring up Go auxiliary camera. So I am super happy. What I've done with these guys, these are, here, let me make that a little bit larger. There we go. I've been working on these Stark. These are Stark infantry, basic infantry from the Song and Ice and Fire game. I've been trying to figure out how to get these guys painted up fast, or just how to get the army painted up fast, which is fantastic because, you know, I remember trying to paint Warhammer armies as a kid, and it just seemed like they would go on and on forever. And so I had that in my mind that, oh my God, we're going to play some kind of a Kings of War game. I got to have an army. It's going to take years worth of effort. But, you know, it really hasn't. I got a unit of foot knights already done or painted up. I haven't based them yet. I'm going to base them later. We'll have to go through that. I got a unit of I guess, well, they're bowmen of some kind done. And then I got these knights done. And I really like them. And they didn't take all that long. They took a little bit long. Cavalry always takes a while, especially when they're already assembled. I got to fix a banner. I got a couple of broken banners I got to fix. But then I was like, oh my God, I got all these basic Stark infantry. But I started with the Army Painter primer and color that was wolf gray, because I wanted them mainly gray because of like their whole surcoats here. And I have really been enjoying painting these, and they haven't taken all that long. I mean, they're really almost tabletop ready right now. I have been really enjoying this. So I'm going to try to get this unit of foot soldiers ready. And then, you know, next time it'll be close to be ready to start basing. I want to get them based. So they do multi-basing with Kings of War, so we can have all units going. So we will see. Shot of coffee. Hey, Sean. Welcome, Sean. Shot of coffee here. Stray's got tea. Let's see here. All right. Yep. I'll get the camera next time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that down, and I'm going to switch over to another camera. Okay, so here I am up here. Oh, you can see me? All right, here I am up here. So I'll be painting. Can you see me? Let's see. Something like that, maybe. All right. So I will be right up here in this corner. And the grape soda. Tomocrat says grape soda. All right. And then we got the thing we're watching down here in the bottom. Let's see if we can make me a little bit bigger. Oh, okay. Yeah, we can. Okay, so now I'm a little bit bigger up here. So then we got the crafting going on down here in this corner, and then we've got this discussion. I think that there were a lot of people who probably have not seen this discussion on John Clements. Now, John Clements was someone who let me go to audio one more time. I bet I am going to have to change over the audio when I start playing. We're going to see. I bet I am. We're going to have to see. But anyway, John Clements, if you don't know him, I had a book of his that was medieval swordsmanship. He was quite popular back in the day with the start of like Arma and Hema. He did a book called Medieval Swordsmanship, and then also another one that was Renaissance Swordsmanship. And he was quite influential in the establishment of the let's see, what was it? I think it was called Arma back in the day, but now Hema, right? And that's the historical martial arts combat groups. And he wrote this essay, which is very difficult to find on. I have just been. Oh, it was really Tomocrat says. Stray says, I just noticed. Been driving. Just hope you. I have been driving and just got home and just noticed the gift. Oh, was it a gift? Well, thank you, Stray. Thank you. So that was a gift. So Tomocrat's membership was a gift. You can gift memberships, and if you're gifting memberships, I will definitely do shots. We're gonna be doing more like membership live streams. We had an awesome one last night. But anyway, but he also wrote this essay on realism and medieval combat, or realism and RPG combat, which I found when I had found the RPG Riddle of Steel, which we've covered here on the channel. Riddle of Steel is one of the first real independent RPGs that I found, and it was supposed to have a really realistic combat system. so I found on the Wayback Machine this essay that John Clements had written. He's a controversial figure, I suppose, in the historical martial arts community. But he had written this article on realism and RPG combat. So I put together videos on it and then also did commentary on it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm going to hit play. And if you cannot hear it, in fact, let me just check one thing. If you cannot hear it, let me know. Because, like I said, this is a more complicated kind of setting here. Actually, let me check. Let me check one more thing before I start. So that was let me check. Let me swap over here to let me swap my audio. Testing. Oh, wait. Now I bet you can hear me again. Just one second then. Testing. Okay. So you should be able to hear me again. Okay, you should be able to hear me. Okay. Wait a minute. God, I should have written down all of my settings because to get it to go through here, just one second. Just one second then. Let's see. The video is monitor and output. The desktop audio is monitor only. Okay. All right. So here I am. I also have no audio, though I thought it was my computer for a moment. So I'm back, but apparently I tried to go over to the video and you lost all audio. Okay, hang on just one second. Well, okay, so the video is monitor and output. Desktop audio would be monitor only. That's this. Monitoring device is going out to my ears here. Got it? Okay. OBS Studio. Look. Settings. God. Output desktop. Oh, I think I found it. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here. Let's see if we can hear me. Settings, audio. No. Well, perhaps the audio stream is muted. No, my God, we have done this. And I thought I had it already. Rats. You think the audio stream is muted? I don't think so. Well, maybe. Maybe. I was hearing the audio. I was hearing the correct audio through my monitor, which is what it's for. So I was hearing the correct audio through that. But it's not broadcasting to the output. OBS. Here's what I found. Well, Well, if it won't work, I have one other option here in just a second. Hold on. Maybe we have another option. Hold on. And that sucks because I've done it before, but it's been a long time. It's been a couple of months since I've done it. So let me swap over here. Maybe we can just do this. Testing. Okay. This should be so much easier than it is. I can add video to the stream
Realism
right
and Fantasy
here.
RPG.
Right there. But I can't see, if I just do it through my software here, I can't have both my painting and my, well, okay, I tell you what, that's fine. The painting won't be up. We'll look at that later. Yeah, you're welcome to. You're welcome to. Okay, I tell you what, we'll just do that. We'll just, okay, fine. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to try to, I'll fight with it later.
The article Realism and Fantasy RPG.
We'll just go right here. We'll just do this. So see, because when I use OBS, which I've done before, but I guess I just forgot how to do it because it's been so long, that I had the painting up and the video that we were watching up. So oh well, here we go. All right, so here we go. Let's just go to the stream. Here we go.
Today I thought we would look at the article Realism and Fantasy RPG Combat by John Clements. This is an older article. I remember it vaguely from years ago when I was getting into the Riddle of Steel role-playing game. It was one of the first really kind of independent RPGs I remember getting. And I had this memory of reading some type of article about RPG combat by John Clements. So as I have been thinking about trying to write my own rules, I wanted to go back and review it and actually see what he said. I finally found the article on the Wayback Machine, so I thought we would go over it and have a discussion. I remember at the time that the Riddle of Steel was promoted for having a very realistic combat system and having the endorsement of the ARMA, and you can see down here, it says a lot of people ask what the ARMA's endorsement is, or rather where it comes from. The following article was written by John Clements, ARMA director, after a conversation he and I recently had about RPG combat. This outlines the way that he would do it. The Riddle of Steel endorsement comes primarily from two things. Riddle of Steel does all the things that are listed below, though not necessarily in the way that he describes them, and does them in a format that doesn't sacrifice playability. So let's see what John Clements had to say on fantasy RPG combat. I'll go over the article, but then I want to provide my own commentary as well as we go. Realism in Fantasy Role-Playing Game Combat by John Clements. As a practitioner and researcher of medieval and Renaissance combat skills for over 2 decades, I'm frequently asked about how real historical fighting relates to what's found in fantasy role-playing games. I'm generally asked if a game cannot have considerable realism in its combat system and still be fun. Having been a sometimes avid gamer since in my early teens, my reaction is usually surprising to those who ask. I will typically sigh and then say the two are incompatible and should not be mixed. My opinion is that RPGs are about having fun and real combat is about a brutal violence and survival. Yet those times which I have been pressed to offer my views, I've also answered that by paying attention to only a few simple ideas, gamers can indeed incorporate considerable realism into their combat without sacrificing a smooth-flowing, playable adventure. The result can then be even more exciting. The problem as I see it is of realism versus playability. In my opinion, an RPG always has to be an abstract combat system. You don't want to be realistic. Real fighting consists of far too many factors, physical, psychological, environmental, tactical, etc., for it to be completely or realistically recreated in a game. There are a nearly infinite number of permutations and possible outcomes. Attempting to include all these elements would result in a clunky simulation, not a quick and fun representation, which is what you want in a game. Trying to incorporate all of the aspects of what happens in actual combat in a game would end up with a system too cumbersome to the serve players. That's probably too cumbersome to serve players, not to mention still being open to considerable debate and disagreement as to what really was historically valid and martially effective anyway. So I offer here for gamers some consideration on how realism in RPG combat can be approached based on my long experience with historical arms and armor and teaching medieval and Renaissance fencing. I consider the following 5 simple points.
I remember Sable Phoenix says, I think I vaguely remember reading this one at one time. Oh, really? Living Ritual says, yes, it's great. A great article. It's the reason I found this channel and subscribed. Oh, well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Living Ritual. It's so good to have you here. I tell you what, I don't know that I have seen you in the live chat before. So here, Living Ritual, here's to you, Living Ritual. The only way that I found it when I remembered was going back to the Wayback Machine to try to make sure that I had found it because I was not able to just find that website live. So I had to find it on the Internet Archive.
points key to those elements of historical fighting which can be legitimately worked into a good game in order to enrich its combat system. Okay, so let's look at these 5 points and then see what we think about them. 1. Armor class. Armor has virtually nothing to do with whether or not you can be hit. What armor does is protect you from injury. After all, when being attacked, armor is either in the way of a blow or isn't, and once struck, either absorbs, deflects some, none, or all of the damage. Thus, whether soft or hard, flexible or rigid, it absorbs, or more accurately deflects blows. Yes, heavier plate armor can somewhat affect your agility and speed as a target compared to, say, being naked, but the encumbrance is far less than commonly believed. In this point, he certainly does seem to be arguing for armor as damage reduction, which is a classic GURPS thing. And of course, I've been a fan of GURPS for many years. Though there is at least one armor as damage reduction variant I know for Dungeons & Dragons because I remember it was in the 3rd ed Unearthed Arcana book, so it's something that can be imported over to Dungeons & Dragons. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons being renowned for an armor class system, which makes you more difficult to hit, and traditionally not considering any type of damage reduction. Of course, this is where you can get into a tremendous amount of argument and back and forth on what exactly it is that armor class represents, just like you can get into a conversation about what hit points represent, especially since Dungeons & Dragons also uses dice to determine damage after you've determined whether or not you're going to be hit or not. So even if you exceed somebody's armor class but then roll low in damage, it could mean that yes, the armor did absorb some of the damage but not all of it. I remember at times in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons trying to determine whether or not the character was actually hit and the armor prevented him from taking damage, or if it was missed entirely. And I think we did that by checking to see if the attack roll would have hit an unarmored target. And if it would have, then we ruled that the target was in fact physically struck, when that mattered. In some of the material that I've been going back and forth on, I'll probably be bringing out later, I have been thinking a lot about, what's the best way to handle this from the game perspective. Like I said, generally speaking, I do like having armor as damage reduction. I tend in that direction. But when you're looking at things mathematically from the dice rolling perspective, and also from the perspective of speed of combat and gameplay, sometimes just armor class systems do have advantages in those areas. So, we will see. We'll take a look at his next subject, which is weapon defense, in the next video. Welcome back.
All right, so I've combined all of my looks at his particular article. I am a heavy fan of weapon defense, of armor absorbing damage. So when I'm trying to work on Fated Edge, for instance, that's the kind of way that I really want to go. And I think that armor as damage reduction is easier to do than active defense, I think. Grimhild. Welcome, Grimhild. It's good to see you. Hey, it's been a while since I've seen you. I tell you what, it's not Grimhild's first time in the chat, but it has been a while since you've been here. So I tell you what, this is to you. Here you go. Here's to you. In first edition Unearthed Arcana, field plate and full plate armors both had damage reduction like 1 or 2 points respectively. Really? Well, that's interesting. So it had both. I like armor as damage reduction. Generally speaking, I like it, and I would like to be able to incorporate that into that. So, and those full and field plate armors had a max number of hit points. Huh. So you actually had degradation. I like degradation too. Sometimes it's cumbersome to actually incorporate. But like the armor degradation, we've seen that in other RPGs, but sometimes it's difficult to incorporate. Sable Phoenix says, I'm a fan of what Vagabond is doing with the players rolling for defense and the armor being a bonus to that. That handles the abstraction eagerly and quickly. Okay, so in Vagabond, so you're saying the players rolling for defense, so it's an active defense system, but that the armor is going to be a bonus to the active defense system. That sounds like GURPS passive defense.
To part 2 of this series on combat realism and fantasy RPGs, we're reviewing and doing some commentary on the 2003 John Clements essay on the subject. In this video, we're going to be talking about his thoughts on weapon defense. 2. Weapon defense. John writes, every hand weapon has an inherent defensive capacity, and different weapons confer different degrees of protection. That is, an ability to guard, to ward, and cover the user. A weapon is not just about damage potential. Even its offensive threat is a form of defense. For instance, all things being equal, a man with a halberd is going to be harder to hit than, say, a man with a dagger. A flail, for example, has less defensive application than does a short sword. It's all a matter of each weapon's shape, length, weight, and maneuverability. And by the way, a shield is a weapon, not armor. A weapon you hold, armor you wear. By considering the defensive value of weapons, we in effect double the uniqueness of each and add significantly to the potential choices our characters are able to make in choosing their armaments. I think this is an interesting point, and I have long thought that unarmed individuals should be very easy to hit in combat. If you're the one holding a sword, whether it's a short sword, a great sword, or even a dagger, it's often very easy to hit somebody who isn't armed in any way. The simple fact that the opponent is also holding a weapon and can use it defensively is a big factor in whether or not you're going to be able to hit them. So I do agree with this point and would like to see some of it incorporated into RPGs. Now, of course, this does play with armor, because you would have somebody who's wearing armor who is not armed at all, but could be hit by a sword and not take damage, because they're very easy to hit, but they've got a high damage reduction. So you could play with both of those things if both of those things are in the RPG. The question is, of course, how much granularity do you want to get into? And I also think that many of these things are going to be relative to one another. If one person is unarmed and a person is holding a dagger or a long knife, the person with the dagger or the long knife has a tremendous advantage in being able to hit the other person. Once the unarmed person draws a sword, however, the advantage shifts dramatically in the side of the person who's holding the sword. It becomes much more difficult for the dagger-wielding person to strike the sword-wielding person. This is also a factor of reach, and then once you get to great swords or polearms, it would shift back in the other direction. So I like this idea, but I also think that this is probably something relative between weapons. Of course, you could come up with set penalties or bonuses for defense for individual weapons, but it might also be enough to be able to do this relatively. If both sides are armed in a similar way, such as both with swords of comparable length, or even just weapons of comparable length. If one of them is a mace and one of them is a sword, maybe that's not enough difference in this area to warrant a bonus or penalty in either direction. They just cancel out. Maybe it's only if you're facing somebody who is armed with a different category of weapon, and maybe your categories go from something like unarmed to small, maybe that's knives and daggers, to hand weapon to great weapon and polearm. That might have enough granularity to capture this, but not be something that is unplayable. So I knew that GURPS was one of the systems that does have defensive statistics for weapons.
Well, hey, also, yes, Grimhild is doing Ghostbusters reenactment. Do you call it reenactment when it's Ghostbusters? But also in the Ravenkeep Discord server, check out the other section, because Grimhild has been doing some amazing Ghostbusters, like the proton pack and all of that. Absolutely amazing, and it is cool. So obviously, yes, do that. That's freaking awesome. James says, I have a lot to say about this, but it's more talking through things than actual commentary or opinions. Well, okay, at the end, I want to have channel members on. So James, get ready. If you want to talk through it, get ready. Sable Phoenix says, now it would be interesting if you had a stat on your weapon in your RPG system called advantage. Zero the Blade says, weapon length does have advantages and disadvantages to hitting someone depending on the situation. James says, like, if you get clocked on upside the head and you're wearing a helmet, you can put out of a fight in one blow. This would, as Sable Phoenix says, this would have nothing to do with the 5E's advantage. Instead, it would be a bonus to your offense or defense. Grimhild, using weapon lengths and more discrete movement distances. A spear is super dangerous at reach, but once you choose to grapple distance, a dagger might be more dangerous than your spear. Yes, and some of the games that we've been looking at have been trying to replicate that. James says, in fact, most blades will put you out of a fight in one blow, and this makes it question hit points as a viable simulation sort of statistic. I talk about that all the time. I think you can do it if you don't have inflationary hit points. Oh, really? I should post. Oh, please do. Please do. It's gotten even crazier. Oh, man. Please do. Please do. Twin Cast says, I like armor weapon degradation, but too much to track with hit points by hand. Injuries to armor on weapons on crits work better. You now own 5 proton packs, 7 if you count child-sized ones I made for my grandkids. Whoa! That is epic. That is epic. That's doing some Crafter's Corner. That's some Crafter's Corner when we got 7 proton packs created. Crafter's Corner can be for cosplay. Can be for cosplay. All right, let's go on with what was going on with
unplayable. So I knew that GURPS was one of the systems that does have defensive statistics for weapons in it, and so I wanted to come over and check those out just to see what it was doing in relation to what we were just talking about. And so I'm over here in GURPS Martial Arts, and there's all kinds of weapon tables inside GURPS Martial Arts, and one of these columns, this one right here, is the parry column. And so let's see what parry means. So parry is the modifier to parry when using the weapon with the indicated skill. F means the weapon is a fencing weapon, and there's rules for that in the basic set. U means it's unbalanced and cannot parry on the turn that it attacks, and no means the weapon cannot parry at all. Let's check out what the fencing rules are. Here we are on page 404 of the basic set. Fencing weapons. The ready position of a fighter using a main gouge, rapier, saber, or small sword skill keeps his weapon pointed toward the foe at all times. As well, the fencing weapons used with these skills are light and maneuverable. These factors make it easy for a fencer to recover from a parry or fall back in the face of an attack. With a fencing weapon, you get +3 to parry instead of the usual +1 when you retreat. See Retreat, page 377. You also suffer only half the usual penalty for multiple parries. See Parrying, page 376. However, your parry has a penalty equal to your encumbrance level, and you cannot parry flails at all. I will note down here we also have some information on flails that says a weapon with a length of chain between the handle and head is a flail. Because of the chain, a flail can wrap around a foe's weapon or shield when he tries to defend against it. Any attempt to parry a flail is at -4. Fencing weapons with their light blades cannot parry flails at all. Even a shield is less useful against a flail. All blocks are at -2. Okay, so those do provide additional defensive statistics for weapons in the game, but they're not considering the relationship between the attacker's weapon and the defender's weapon, generally speaking, except in a few special cases, like the situation with the fencing weapons and the flails. Here is a look at the first take of the kind of situation I was thinking about with kind of a matrix between how the attacker is armed and how the defender is armed. So I've got the attacker over here on this side, and I'm just breaking this into the categories unarmed, tiny, small, medium, and large. And this is the size of the armament that both the attacker and the defender has. Defender across the top. With regard to our categories over here, I would expect that most all of the weapons that people typically go into battle with would be regarded as medium weapons. This is most of your swords, clubs, maces, axes, most axes anyway. All of that would be medium weapons. And then you go down to small for things like short swords or smaller weapons in general. Then you go up to large for two-handed swords, pole arms, things like that, keeping it very simple. I did also put in a category, though, here called tiny, which might be for knives, maybe daggers, depending on your interpretation, but tiny weapons that are certainly better to have if you don't have anything at all, especially if your opponent is unarmed, but probably not really things people are expecting to go into battle with. Then, on the chart, basically you just zero out anytime anybody is fighting somebody who is equivalently armed on this table. So that means you don't really have to worry about it in most cases. Most combatants have medium weapons, so don't worry about trying to figure out who is harder or easier to hit. That saves a lot of time, but then this comes into play when somebody is definitely at an advantage or disadvantage because of the size of their weapon. The unarmed column here for the defender is very important, because I think, as I've said before, that I think it should be really easy for an armed attacker to hit an unarmed defender. So of course the unarmed versus unarmed remains the same, but then the tiny weapon gets a little bit of a bonus, and we shouldn't actually be caught up on exactly what these numbers are, because what exactly the bonus would be would depend on what type of dice you're rolling in the system. Are you rolling a d20 or a d10, or are you doing dice pools or whatever with that particular system? Really what I'm trying to do here is communicate the relative values of all of these different pairings. So an attacker armed with a tiny weapon against somebody who is unarmed has an advantage, and certainly if somebody's got a really sharp knife and you're unarmed, you really don't want to have to get into a scrap with them because you're probably going to get cut. But at least it's possible if they've got a knife that you're putting your body in the way of their body, and you're not actually having to do something like put your hand in the knife blade or something like that. But the problem gets worse as you go up to the attacker armed with small and medium and then large weapons. It's easy to hit the defender. And actually, you know, I've got the word unarmed up here, but this should also include unshielded. Just because you might not be holding a sword, but you are holding a buckler or a small shield or a larger shield, that's not unarmed, because those are obviously things that you would use to obstruct your opponent's attack that is not your physical body. But then going across here, what we do is we just step this across all of the different categories to come up with the advantage and disadvantage that an attacker or defender is at. So I like this idea. I'm not sure where I would ultimately go with it, but it is something I've been thinking about doing for a while. I wonder how it could be integrated into an RPG combat system.
So I'm wondering, like, if that's something that should be integrated into Fated Edge when we're working on the Fated Edge system. It does have that table, and, you know, it seems like in today's world, people are against tables, but that does give you a relationship between what you are holding and what somebody else is holding, which I tend to like, and that gives you a reason to have something like a tiny weapon, which is a knife, which is like a holdout kind of thing, because if you're in a situation where nobody has a weapon and you're the one that draws a knife, I feel like you're at a major advantage. But if you're holding a knife and somebody else has got a halberd, well, okay, that doesn't seem like it's going so well. So I do like this relationship between combatants. Grimhild says, I agree that a more realistic system would have status effects building up until disabled or dead, but a system that has realistic damage means that an adventure can be over very fast. It could be. It could be. I'm not necessarily against that. We'll see. Oh, Moss Ritter strikes again. Maybe that's why Moss Ritter was so attractive to everyone. Putting conditions in your inventory. Yeah. Sean Schultz says, I remember seeing firsthand a skilled knife fighter taking an average sword and shield fighter in a HEMA fight. The knife fighter absolutely decimated the sword and shield fighter. Skill counts for as much or more than equipment used in reality. Well, yeah, this is not accounting for skill. If you've been following what I've been working on with Fated Edge, I'm very skill focused. So this would be I would count this as a modifier to skill. This is a modifier to skill, because right now, yeah, what we're looking at, this table that's up on the screen right now, is not is not skill, right? You're looking at a modifier to skill. So if you're an extremely trained person, maybe you can take out a sword and shield fighter with a knife. Grimhild says, but it might work if you build in some kind of narrative drama plot armor points that allow a player character to avoid killing blows or change them into non-lethal, at least until they run out. So you're talking about the meta currency here. And we talk a lot about meta currency on this channel. Oh, is it getting hitchy? Uh-oh. We'll see what happens when it starts again. Uh-oh. All right, so let's see where it goes here. Hopefully we don't have glitches. Let's see. Let's go again. All right, so going on to the next section.
But anyway, I suppose that concludes our discussion of the defensive value of weapons. I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we will be discussing weapon armor dynamics. Welcome back to part 3 of our series on realism in fantasy RPG combat, where we are going over and doing some commentary on the essay by John Clements from 2003. In this video, we're going to be looking at weapon armor dynamics. Okay, next, weapon armor dynamics. John writes, different weapons do different degrees of damage against hard or soft armors. If this were not so, there would not be so many different weapons designed that are developed. Yet the degree of difference a weapon does against various armors is not all that profound. It is simply a matter that some are better at slicing or stabbing soft armors, and others are better at crushing, denting, or piercing hard armors, nothing more. For example, a special anti-armor stabbing sword is great against plate armor, but its thick, rigid blade does not cut at all. A wide, curved sword slices well against cloth armor, but has much less effect when chopping at chain-link mail armor. It can really all be reduced to the concept of +1 to +2 or -1 to -2. Further, a ranged attack, missile weapon, does not necessarily face the same degree of defense as a melee weapon engaged against an opponent. The missile weapon only seeks a target, and thus only faces armor and obstructions. The melee weapon, by contrast, in order to hit, has to be used in active fighting. The two do not necessarily encounter the same degree of defensive capability or capacity from the opponent. The bottom line then is that if the above is considered, there's no real need for more complicated weapon armor dynamics. I'm not sure about this one because I'm not sure how to interpret it. And in part, some of this is because he uses this vague word profound here, yet the degree of difference a weapon does against various armors is not all that profound. Well, I guess different people are going to have different interpretations about what exactly it means to be profound. I remember in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and Combat and Tactics, I think there were different modifiers for different weapons against different types of armor. And that was basically a +1, +2, or -1 or -2 situation. But I will note that in that case, of course, you are rolling a d20, and this is something that I think about a lot when designing games, and that the random roll of a d20 is quite swingy, and so a +1 to give you an advantage over a particular kind of armor if you're wielding a particular kind of weapon may not actually be all that much, may not be very statistically significant at all. So the idea of +1 or +2 or -1 or -2, that might have to change depending on what type of random number generator you're using. GURPS has some of this. A damage type is particularly significant in determining injury to a character, and some armors are better or worse at handling some type of damage types. Whether or not the relationship between armor and damage type is overdone.
I'm pausing that for a second because I hear that it's skipping. So let me see if it just needs to buffer or something like that. Let's see what's going on in the comments here. TSL Frontman says there's something to be said for a difference in attacking a smart enemy versus a dumb beast or undead. Few games recognize this beyond a lower AC or similar. You know, you're talking about dumb things. Hackmaster does that. Hackmaster actually gives you a bonus to your attack if you're an intelligent fighter. And they say that, hey, that's why an intelligent fighter can take out like a dumb troll or something like that. Because you should get an advantage to your attacks by actually being an intelligent fighter. And like Dungeons and Dragons doesn't do that because your attack statistic is, based on strength. Meta currency, yeah. So I've been going back and forth on meta currency, like a fate point in Fate. People are very divided on that. Zero the Blade says weapon length can change the outcome depending on the distance between fighters. See, Twincast says the table looks fine for modifiers. And I think this is the table about different weapon lengths and different weapon sizes. Couple obvious exceptions would be close confines as well as people grappling armored opponents to thrust a knife through their visor, etc. Yeah, so if you were grappling would be different, so that you would need to add that in. I agree. We're talking about combat at a standard rate. Yeah, a standard distance. I agree, Twincast. James Bacon says, then again, you're taking that simulationist route. I think players might have fun just being crumpled into heaps of metal. I think the players might have fun just being crumpled into heaps of metal strapped dead meat, as long as they know what they're in for. But Sable Phoenix says, once again, that depends on the math. Pathfinder 2, every +1 matters. Don't be self-deprecating, James. All right, let's see what's going on here.
I think that's going to be a matter of taste. Kind of like how we were talking about what probably matters with how the two combatants are armed is something relative to one another. Here's another situation where you're going to have to be able to compare what the attacker has to what the defender has. There are probably only so many times you want to do that in a game, because that does slow it down. It's obviously easier if someone needs to perform an action like an attack if basically all of the information that they have is sitting there in front of them. The more things that are dependent upon comparing some feature of your character to the feature of who you're attacking, the slower it goes, because all of the different PCs are going to be different, and it could be that everybody who they're fighting could be different. Maybe all of the goblins or the orcs that they're fighting are armed the same, so at least you know you're always comparing it to some kind of constant, but that does slow things down. So I guess it's the balance on getting the right amount of this. But I guess that's with everything, of course. Getting the balance right and getting just enough of something in there, but not too much. So I've got 3 games here that I checked up on, and then I also have some ideas with some tables that might implement this idea. The first here is that I went back over to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Option Combat and Tactics. I thought I remembered there being +1s and +2s and -1s and -2s for different weapons versus different types of armor. I couldn't find any of that, so I might have been misremembering. But I did find here that weapons are divided into 3 categories: bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. This describes the weapon's method of creating injuries and is used to determine what kinds of critical hits the weapon inflicts. And of course there were critical hit tables inside the Combat and Tactics books that did use the damage type of the weapon. It says, in addition, some monsters may be partially resistant to the effects of certain weapon types. For instance, skeletons take only half damage from slashing or piercing weapons. So in some ways, it sounds like not a whole lot has changed. We have different damage types in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but they really don't come into play all that much. Here, they're not coming into play very much either, except for some resistances, like in 5th edition, where we also have some vulnerabilities. But then, interestingly, here we do have the critical hits. So then I went over to GURPS, and this is specifically a table from Low Tech. So you can see we've got a bunch of information on a bunch of different types of armor, and this column here, DR, that's your damage resistance. And it notes the amount of damage resistance the item gives. The DR of some armor, such as mail, varies depending on damage type. So here we've got our weapon armor dynamics. See the notes after the table. The asterisk means that armor is flexible and susceptible to blunt trauma. So, for instance, we have light layered leather armor, which has a DR of 2 and an asterisk. That means that it is flexible. We'll look up flexibility rules here in just a moment. Here we have medium scale armor, which has a DR of 4, and it has note number 4, which means that it is -1 DR versus crushing. Something like the heavy leather, which is DR 3, is -1 DR versus impaling, and so forth. Interesting note here that wood armor, which is DR 3, has the note semi-ablative, loses 1 DR per 10 points of basic damage it resists. This is our information from the basic set on flexible armor and blunt trauma. Flexible armor such as a leather jacket, mail hauberk, or modern ballistic vest is much lighter than rigid armor, but doesn't absorb the full force of the blows it stops. An attack that does crushing, cutting, impaling, or piercing damage may inflict blunt trauma if it fails to penetrate flexible DR. For every full 10 points of cutting, impaling, or piercing damage, or 5 points of crushing damage stopped by your DR, you suffer 1 HP of injury due to blunt trauma. This is actual injury, not basic damage. There is no wounding modifier. If even 1 point of damage penetrates your flexible DR, however, you do not suffer from blunt trauma. If you layer other DR over flexible DR, only damage that penetrates the outer layer can inflict blunt trauma. So here we have armor as damage resistance, and we have a lot of information on the interplay between different weapons through their damage type and the type of DR that they provide. I used to be a tremendous fan of all of this, but now I think it's too much. There are a tremendous number of different options here to select from, and there are a whole lot of different things to remember with different notes and asterisks and everything else to remember during play. I love it, but it is a lot to reference. As I was thinking about how this might be simplified, I thought about MERP, which I haven't thought about in a while, because it does have this kind of weapon armor dynamics, although it has a much simpler kind of armor system than does GURPS. So here are MERP tables, and you can see across the top of these that MERP just has plate, chain, rigid leather, soft leather, and no armor. So those are your armor categories right there. That's much easier than the multitude of different armor categories that GURPS has. But MERP makes up for that by having a different weapon table for every type of weapon. Not only just slashing and cutting or bludgeoning or piercing, but for instance, this is the one-handed slashing weapons attack table against those different types of armor. The one-handed concussion weapons attack table. The two-handed weapons attack table. The missile weapons attack table. And there are also unarmed attacks, and then claws and bites, and then you can get into many more different tables as well. And fortunately, it doesn't go into such detail as this is the short sword attack table. It just has one-handed slashing. So there is some amalgamation of the weapons into these tables, and then you could break out Rollmaster and get into a lot more detail as well. But here is our weapon armor dynamics. But I was wondering if you could take this more simplified armor categories and then put them onto more simplified damage categories. Something like this: soft leather, hardened leather, mail, and plate. There you go. That's what kind of armor you've got. And then you've got bludgeoning, cutting, and piercing. And then maybe if we had this designation of flexible, we could add that in there. But then we could say we got, maybe this is damage resistance or something. So we've got 1s across the board for soft leather, 2 for hardened leather. Then mail is kind of interesting because it's 2s and 4s and 3s, as well as being flexible. And then you go up to plate and you get 5s, or whatever. The exact numbers here don't matter. We're just talking about the relationships between things. The actual dice or whatever we were rolling in whatever game system would determine what these modifiers are. But maybe you could simplify even further to just something like this: light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, extra heavy armor. What is the person wearing? Do we really need to get into the exact type of material everywhere? Maybe not for some kinds of systems. We just know that your opponent is lightly armored or not armored at all, lightly armored, medium armor, heavily armored, or extra heavy armor. And here I've got these as negatives. Maybe these are against your attack value or something like that. This is definitely simpler, but we are losing something about the weapon armor dynamics here. We're just talking about the armor and not the comparison between weapons and armor. It seems like to have that cross comparison, it does seem to work better if you've got the type of damage that the weapon does versus the material that the armor is made from. That seems to work better if you're going to be going down that road with your RPG. But anyway, those are my thoughts on weapon armor.
All right, so what are people saying here? Let's see. You're talking about, Sean wants to talk about opposed rolls and these things becoming better. And we go back and forth on opposed rolls too. Absolutely. Steel Mongoose says the quality, or James says to Steel Mongoose, the quality of being amusing, or this is about the self-deprecating humor. I got you. So Sean says, you could make an armor table of light, medium, and heavy crossed with flexible, rigid, and mixed. You could, yes, you could do that too. I mean, in order to have the relationship between the two, it often seems like you end up in a table. I mean, maybe not necessarily, but it does seem like you often end up in that. You could make an armor table of light, medium, and heavy crossed with flexible, medium, and rigid. And then once you come up with a value there, you could cross-reference that to the type of weapon that the opponent's using. I mean, you could do that. Hey, Pan Smith, good evening. Pan Smith says, listening in one ear. Good to see you, Pan Smith. Yeah, and then, yeah, okay, so that's where I was going, Sean. Then the weapons could have a similar matrix that corresponds. Mad says, opposed rolls helps with the attacker asking too many questions, but it also doubles the amount of rolls you got to do, right? It doubles the amount of rolls that are out there that you've got to do. I hadn't completely resolved that situation in my mind yet, because we've been talking about, when we were talking about RPG design on the morning grind, we've talked about that quite a bit. RPG design, the morning grind, we actually went in deep on whether or not you should have like an active defense role, or what that means first of all, and whether or not you should have it, and when is it something that actually has an advantage over not having one. So we went into a lot of that. Yeah, it's, to me, there's a lot of questions about that. I like opposed roles because I come from Hero Quest and GURPS. But on the other hand, if in some systems, it just makes sense to roll against a static number, I think.
Dynamics, I hope you enjoyed it. Check out some other videos on the channel if you did. and I will see you in the next video, where we will be discussing combat skill. Welcome back to part 4 of our series on realism in fantasy RPG combat, where we are going over and then providing commentary on the 2003 essay by John Clements on the subject. In this video, we're going to be talking about combat skill. Number 4, combat skill. John writes, "A warrior has fighting skill, a non-warrior does not. Once a person learns about how to fight in general and how to use a weapon, regardless of whether or not they have high skill with any particular weapon, they nonetheless know and understand the vital principles and concepts of combat. They have a higher sense of distance, timing, technique, and perception, as well as the necessary martial attitude. This, presumably along with physical conditioning, is what defines them as a fighting character. Non-warriors don't work this way, so virtually any weapon, from a chair to a sickle, can be employed by a warrior without their training with it first. They may not have the expertise or mastery of that particular weapon, but whatever it is, they can certainly pick it up and reasonably defend themselves using it. Fighting skill is not an issue of just physical aptitude then, but neuromuscular preparation, i.e. training in understanding core principles. Looks like the same applies if caught unarmed. Identical concepts applied between weapons and unarmed fighting, even if the warrior doesn't have the specific training in the unarmed techniques. Skill is what determines whether or not you can hit or be hit in melee. When it comes to using weapons, you really only have expertise and mastery, say +1 and +2 for instance, and everything else is just know-how. But if you aren't a warrior and have a sedentary non-physical nature, then you certainly would be unskilled in fighting and get, for example, a -1 to -2 on any weapon used. The bottom line is there is general combat skill and then there is weapon-specific skill. The two are distinct but interrelated. I do think about this quite a bit, because if somebody is really good at killing you with a short sword, and then you hand the person a longer sword or you hand the person a mace, they are still going to be really good at killing you. So I think there is a lot to be said for a combat skill. Now, of course, this runs counter to something like GURPS, which, like I said, I have been a fan of for years, which has every single different weapon divided down into different skills. Now, of course, they do default to one another, which is another layer of complication. So, becoming good at one does give you a higher default at using another, but you're going into a lot of granular detail about each individual weapon, and then you can get into different techniques from there about parrying or being specifically good at some particular form of attack and getting increasingly granular. That can certainly appeal to a lot of people, and it did appeal to me for a long time, but it's probably overdone. And so this is something that much simpler, even more narrative style games do better, because like Fate, for instance, just has like a combat skill and then a shooting skill to handle ranged weapons. And some people won't think that's granular enough, but that's certainly the most dramatic application of this principle. You either know how to fight or you don't, and then there's some degree in knowing how to fight, and then the particulars of what particular weapon you're using isn't really all that determinative in the outcome of the battle. I think a lot of times we use a lot of different combat skills and techniques in games because it's often the combat that a lot of the game revolves around. And so it makes sense that if you're going to be spending a lot of time in the game actually fighting each other, or fighting dragons or other NPCs or orcs or whatever it is that you're doing, if the combat's a big part of that, then it makes sense for there to be a lot of rules, or could make sense for there to be a lot of rules to explain how you might do, this or this other thing a little bit differently. And so you end up with a lot more combat rules than you do for, say, social situations. On the whole, I'm in favor of reducing the number of combat skills far down from something like what GURPS has. Maybe going to the degree of Fate is a bit extreme, but I think that some small number of combat skills is probably what you want. Then, rather than distinguishing between the fighter who is really good at using the mace versus really good at using the short sword, well, then you could perhaps distinguish using a crushing weapon or a cutting weapon against the particular armor that the opponent's wearing. Simplifying in one frees up more cognitive space and time at the gaming table to focus on something else. So if I were playing GURPS today, for instance, I would probably aggregate weapon skills or use bang or wildcard skills, as they're called, in order to group together fighting skills. It occurs to me that when he's talking about expertise or mastery in one particular weapon, sure, we could certainly have a character who is particularly deadly with a particular kind of sword, like some kind of sword master that uses some kind of culturally specific sword. In a game like Fate, using an aspect for expertise in that weapon, or mastery, or maybe a stunt or something like that to represent those, would probably take care of what you need. Now let's look at some games. We could go and look at Fate.
Let's see what people are saying over here. Pan Smith says, I think we decided active defense equals saving throws. I don't know if we necessarily decided that. I don't know that we came to a great decision on that. Zero the Blade says, but what if they're using a special weapon that were made for attacking a specific enemy type with defensive traits? Well, so that would go back to some kind of table? Would that go back to some kind of table? Or would that be something like, a fate aspect that, oh, now you're attacking the specific thing that you are trying to do? I don't know. Twincast says, what you call your armor categories doesn't really make a difference, but whether you account for different attack types changes everything. Not thrilled when games let you cut through hardened steel. Sable Phoenix says, the more you read of this, the more I think I haven't read it. It still sounds vaguely familiar. Sean suggests weapon specialty is an extra ability or feat. Living Ritual says, I like how opposing roles feel in melee especially. It gives the feel of two opponents going at it, looking to blow while also block. Also, one level then will be extra deadly when you can only defend once. Sean does say, never underestimate the power of social combat to kill an enemy. Uh-oh. Guinness drunk, switching to ginger beer. All right, so let's go to, what is this? I believe this is AD&D.
And also the massive lists of weapon skills in GURPS, but I think we've already covered everything there that's relevant to the point at hand. But it did occur to me that 5th edition D&D basically doesn't have a combat skill. A 5th edition attack is pretty simple. The rules say you roll a d20 and then add your strength or dexterity ability modifier, if the attack is a melee attack or a ranged attack, respectively. Simple. Everyone, no matter what their class, rolls a d20 and then adds either their strength or dexterity modifiers. Both fighters and wizards fight in exactly the same way, the only difference there being what the individual character's modifiers are, which, as I've said before, is probably only really the difference between a +1 and a +3, or maybe a +4 for any individual characters, so it's not much of a variation anyway. Oh, and then the character also gets to add his or her proficiency bonus when attacking with a weapon that he or she is proficient in. 5th edition has weapons split into rather broad categories like simple and martial weapons. The game just tells you which of these groups your class is proficient in. So there you get some difference, because the fighter and the wizard both using swords would not be equally as good, because the fighter can add his or her proficiency bonus to the attack roll with the sword, and the wizard cannot. For everything D&D is, that's pretty simple. This idea of everyone fighting the same goes all the way back to when Thaco was a thing. Here's an example from AD&D. Many people will be surprised to learn that level 1 characters had exactly the same chance to hit something in combat back then. In fact, I was looking at the AD&D book, and Thaco at any particular level for a character was not even in the section on the character classes. It's in the combat section on calculating Thaco, and here's the table. So this is basically the combat skill per category of PCs. Each one of the character classes fits into one of these categories. For instance, fighters are in the warrior category. Warriors didn't actually start off any better than wizards at fighting. It was just that fighters got better much more quickly. Thaco means to hit armor class 0. So a Thaco of 20 is the worst. You'd have to roll a 20 in order to hit an armor class 0 character. Lower Thacos are better. Kind of crazy, isn't it? But that's basically the combat skill. Thaco is how well you fight.
We've certainly talked about Thaco quite a bit. That even came up this morning when we were looking at Dragon Quest.
But then it got complicated a little bit with weapon proficiencies, and unfortunately, weapon proficiencies were weapon-specific and not for a whole group or kind of weapon. That seems to be a negative. If you were not proficient in the weapon you were fighting with, you had to take a penalty, and the penalty for being non-proficient was different for different classes. It was least for fighters, since they were the ones who were supposed to have received the most cross-training between different kinds of weapons. However, AD&D does have this reference to weapon groups, but curiously it only gives some suggestions for them and leaves the weapon groupings themselves rather free form for the DM. A character who is proficient with a weapon in the group is supposed to be familiar with all the other weapons in the group and will only have half of the character's non-proficiency penalty applied if they try to attack with it. Probably, if I'm going to go simple with things, then I would make the weapon categories the things you get proficiency in. Then there's just the penalty for non-proficiency. That's the direction that 5th edition moved with very broad categories. Although in that case there's no penalty for being non-proficient, it's just that you don't get to add a bonus. Then from there, AD&D had weapon specialization, but only for fighters. If a fighter expended another proficiency slot on a single weapon, they would get +1 to hit and +2 damage with it if it was a melee weapon. But it notes that weapon specialization is an optional rule anyway. So if you were looking at a game and had weapon proficiency based on weapon groups, then you could still have specialization for a single weapon, and I like that. You could go even deeper if you had AD&D Combat and Tactics, because that had not only specialization, but also weapon mastery, with the levels Mastery.
Did anybody get into AD&D Combat and Tactics? Did anybody get into that? Oh, Grimhild says, I just posted a bunch of pictures to the General Geekdom on Discord. Oh, let me post the Ravenkeep Discord server a link. So if you want to see all of these proton packs, that's totally a Crafter's Corner kind of thing. Go to the Ravenkeep Discord server and check out the General Geekdom. All hail our Lord and Master Thaco. Mad582 says, all this focus on attacking and defending, streamline damage, i.e. no damage rolls and just a few layers of wound. See, what is this? All this focus on attacking and defending, streamline damage to no damage rolls and just a few layers of woundedness.
High mastery and then grand mastery levels, if you thought that you needed to go even further and deeper into weapon specialization. But depending on the granularity of the game, you might not need that anyway, and weapon mastery was supposed to be very rare anyway. So surprisingly, AD&D appears to be a model here for something like this kind of weapon skill. For now, I like keeping things simple. Maybe a game could go with something like a fighting skill, proficiency in weapon groups, and then specialization in individual weapons. Okay, I think that's just about enough on this subject for now. If you've enjoyed it, please go back to my channel. There's a whole bunch of other videos to watch.
Let's see. Twincast says, dexterity for attack rolls, strength for damage rolls, regardless of class or weapon, except guns use their strength, not yours. I feel very strongly about this. I understand where you're coming from, Twincast. I think that, like, I've been looking at a bunch of different things where the strength, it's like, okay, melee attacks use strength to hit and for damage. Like, if you're separating strength and damage, if you have those, you have an attack roll and a damage roll. A lot of things we've been looking at, which is a lot of D&D, is like, okay, if it's a melee attack, it's strength for your positive to hit and it's strength for your damage. But why isn't it something like melee for your attack roll? Yeah, and then strength for your damage roll. Why not cross those? Like, that would provide more variability. It totally would. I understand where you're coming from. Yep, Thaco again. Oh, Grimhild is totally agreeing with Twincast. Yeah, I don't understand why that hasn't ever been done. It's so much, even in 5th edition when we're looking at this, because as I've been writing up stats for 5th edition characters and NPCs, it's like, okay, this is a melee attack, so it's +5, or plus whatever. That's to attack and damage. Why not separate that? Why not separate that? Grimhild also says, I used Combat and Tactics in the mid to late 90s after it came out when I ran our Forgotten Realms campaign. I remember just being ecstatic when Combat and Tactics came out. When we got Combat and Tactics, when this came out and we had that book at our gaming table, it was like insane. We were like, oh my God, this book is awesome. It got used all the time. Like, I remember that, like Combat and Tactics back in the day. Do I have the Combat and Tactics book? Yes, I've got Combat and Tactics back there. Hold on, let me grab it. I thought that I added it back to my collection, because when Combat and Tactics came out, it was like this is a serious book right here. I mean, AD&D was never the same. This was one of the major landmark books to me in AD&D. Once you got a hold of combat and tactics, it completely was. So, now we're getting into GURPS level stuff because, for instance, Sable Phoenix says, Twin Cast, that depends on the weapon. A rapier's damage has almost nothing to do with your strength. So now we're deep into GURPS, right? Additionally, the type of strike can affect the strength of the blow. That's what GURPS does. Absolutely. It's both of those. Steel Mongoose says it seems that OD&D assumed you were always going to be smashing through armor. I guess it did.
And in the next video, we will take a look at the subject of initiative and choice for fantasy combat RPGs. See you then. Welcome back to part 5 of our series on realism in fantasy RPG combat, where we are going over and then providing commentary on the 2003 essay on the subject by John Clements. In this video, we will be talking about initiative and choice. Point number 5, initiative and choice. John writes, the standard mechanism for determining who attacks first in most games is an initiative roll modified by a character's weapon speed and personal agility or reflexes. That sounds a lot like Advanced Dungeons & Dragons with some aspects of combat and tactics thrown in, which does make sense given the time that this was written. The problem is fighting does not really work this way. Speed and timing are different things. Any attack can only occur in one of 3 times, either before, during, or after the adversary attacks. Just because you have the opportunity to attack first doesn't mean you have to or should want to. The faster fighter, instead of striking first, can often delay and attack just as the opponent moves so as to counter-time their action and thereby deliver a more effective blow. Or the faster fighter can choose to delay his action and strike just as the opponent has, voiding and counter-striking in one action by taking advantage of the opening afterwards. This decision-making occurs instantly in fighting and is why fights involve not just overwhelming the opponent with blows, but also pausing, feinting, shifting, and juxtaposing for advantage. Further, a weapon's speed, or rather its maneuverability as it relates to weight, is a factor in its ability to hit, not whether or not it gets in the first attack. Okay, so point taken, I suppose. I have been thinking a lot about initiative systems because I've never really liked Dungeons & Dragons initiative for a couple of different reasons I can get into later, but there are definitely some new systems which use alternate ways of handling initiative, but I agree that this is a difficult part of combat to model, and I'm not sure who exactly gets it right. He doesn't really provide any recommendations here, which is understandable because when you're playing a game, it's difficult to handle all of that. So let's take a quick look at several different games here. When I said the D&D initiative system is one of my least favorite earlier, I was thinking of the basic 5th edition initiative. The problem I have with it is that it essentially decides a random order for the combat, and that gets locked in for the whole battle. There is supposed to be something about your character that determines how fast they are, their dexterity score, but once again we run into the problem that this amounts to rolling a d20 and then adding somewhere between a +1 and a +3, or maybe a +4 to the roll, and that's that. There isn't even much of a mechanical difference between the slow characters and the fast characters. The random element overpowers the relatively meager dex bonus, and so a basically random order is established. Now, some people may like having a essentially random order because that's just the chaos of combat to them. With a large number of combatants, it's possible for it to take a not insignificant amount of time to get everyone rolled up and for the game master to record the turn order someplace on an initiative tracking device. And to me,
and I hate that. I do hate that. I hate that. That, okay, combat's about to start. I draw my sword and attack the guy. I'm about to cut his head off. And the game master says, okay, everybody roll for initiative. And as a result, people get up from the table to go get a sandwich or go to the bathroom because it's going to take a while to resolve the initiative order. I hate that. Like when somebody draws their, somebody does something, somebody says, I draw thy sword, cut their head off. Like, that shouldn't be the time when everybody gets up and goes to the bathroom. That should be when like action is at its most intense. And yet for some reason in 5th edition, we have the situation where initiative, like the whole game stops and pauses at that moment. Okay, everybody roll initiative. Now, everybody, please, hold on. Let me go over here to my initiative tracker. I hate that. I hate that. Let's see. Pan Smith says, Hackmaster uses Dex and Int to determine attack mire, strength for damage. And yes, I agree. Yes, Pan Smith is right. I love Hackmaster, and everybody's always surprised about that because they're like, oh, don't you want more narrative, like story-driven games? But there is so much. Hackmaster is one of the games that I think about the most. I loved playing Hackmaster when I was at Gen Con and playing with the creators of the game. I absolutely loved it. I think there's a lot, there's a lot that Hackmaster doesn't do if you want more narrative style games and so forth, or more game style games. And I understand that. But if you want a certain style game, Hackmaster really does a lot. Grimhild says, but I also think weapons should be strength multipliers. I'm hearing you too, because the strength is because a weapon is like a lever. A weapon is like a lever. Multiplier, strength times weapon damage, skill times die roll versus constitution, armor, skill versus die roll. Yeah, Grimhild's got all kinds of stuff that's in here. But the weapon should be a multiplier because the weapon is like a lever. It's almost like I have thought more about effect dice in index card RPG, right? It's almost like that. The effect die in index card RPG, that's not technically a multiplier. I'm talking about a multiplier is something that's multiplied, but that it's an effect die. Your tool, meaning your weapon, is an effect die in index card RPG. It's the same kind of thing, but like you're talking about all the different things here. It's the multiplier: strength times weapon damage times skill times damage roll versus constitution times armor times skill times die roll. Yeah. Sable Phoenix says, yeah, the type of strike, like a draw cut, doesn't use your strength at all. It's the motion of returning the weapon to your original position before the strike. But how complex do you want to get? How complex do you want to get? Sean says, this is why I like the rule that some OSR are using where there's no initiative roll and everybody just makes their attacks effectively at once. I am big on simultaneous action. I want to see if I can come up with a simultaneous action mechanic for my RPG. I agree with you, Sean. I'm a huge fan of that. The speed and tactics can be shown by having the greatest success happening first. Yeah. Stable Fingers says, yeah, the 5e initiative is pretty lame. It's pretty lame. Just have a set initiative score. Mad 582 says. James says 100%. Anytime an in-game system slows the game down unintentionally, I find it cumbersome. And initiative to me is definitely one of those. Zero the Blade says the stupid flow chart can be slow if you don't narrow it down for quicker combat. Grimhild says the first edition used D6 for initiative. Dex only applied to surprise. Second edition used D10. First edition used D6 for initiative. We were looking at stuff like that with what was that? Dragon Quest today. Dex only applied to surprise. Second edition used D10 minus Dex. Lowest goes first. Combat and tactics changed it to initiative phases of very fast. Yeah, very fast, average, slow. Yeah, the combat and tactics introduced initiative phases. Yes. And also, like, yeah, initiative, individual initiative modified by weapon speed, which I'm reasonably for. Hackmaster does that. Hackmaster does that. So there are elements of that I like. Sable Phoenix says, ICRPG is genius. To me, it's at that perfect fulcrum between crunch and speed narrative gameplay. There is a lot to like about index card RPG. I want to look at it more. We'll look at it more on the morning grind. Pan Smith says, turn-based systems inevitably turn into a glorified board game, boring with static initiative. Initiative is a big topic. I mean, initiative, I think, is a major topic. Twincast says, Sable Phoenix, which is why I'd give cutting and piercing a higher base value than bludgeoning, with trade-off that the armor largely flips the balance. Steel Mongoose coming in on the simulationist side. Steel Mongoose says, I'm a simulationist. No problem with that, because that's one of our axes. Steel Mongoose coming in on the simulationist side. I'm a simulationist, but I'm trying to simulate the way stories play. Oh, went a different direction. You know, I don't know if you were involved in these conversations, but when I was talking with Lou Anders, he's talking about how fate simulates storytelling. He talks about simulating storytelling, and some people didn't understand what they meant by that. But what are you trying to simulate? Most of the time when people talk about simulationist RPGs, they're talking about physics and so forth. But simulationist, can you simulate storytelling? According to Lou, when I'm talking to him on the live streams, he's talking about fate simulating storytelling. I'm also big on this idea of simulating storytelling. Grimhild says, I also like simultaneous action, just need to figure out how to do tactical movement. Steel Mongoose is working on some ideas for that. We want to make sure that it doesn't bog play down. It has to be quick. And of course, you can go much more complex by factoring in multiple attributes and everything. Mad says, simultaneous action. Everyone just yells out what they did and do their roles. When the DM says stop, then everybody figures it out. Oh, hey, Charlie. Hey, Charlie. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, let's keep going. This doesn't even model anyone being faster really anyway. To me, being faster could imply one of at least two things. First, being faster could mean that you act first in combat. Arguably, that's what D&D is trying to represent here, but it does this weakly by having the random element overwhelm the character's speed modifier, and the D&D combat itself undercuts this with the inflationary hit point system. It really doesn't matter who's going to attack first if on a hit, everyone is rolling something in the range of d6s or d8s for damage, and then we have to go through 30, 40, 50, or probably even more hit points in order to bring down a foe. The best defense, I think, can be a good offense. If you strike first and can kill or disable your opponent before they have a chance to strike you, well, that seems like a really good deal to me. But in most D&D combat, you're not really ever going to be able to do that, so striking first starts to matter a whole lot less. So I consider initiative and the combat system's damage dealing to be intertwined here. Second, being faster could mean getting more done in less time. You're able to attack or perform more actions before somebody else who was slower. That doesn't occur in the basic D&D initiative system. In fact, fighters getting extra attacks as they level up might more closely model getting faster with your attacks anyway. The 5th edition DMG does provide some variance, like just using a static 10 instead of a d20 roll to decide initiative. That does cut down on the randomness, of course, and makes faster characters actually higher in the initiative order predictably, but it probably also stacks a lot of characters up on 12s and 13s. I like the speed factor initiative variant, which is basically how I remember playing a lot of AD&D. This is on page 270 of the DMG. Players must announce their action at the start of each round, and then roll an initiative roll that is modified by the type of action they're taking, the size of the creature, and maybe some other things as the DM likes. Dexterity modifiers are in there too. This is done at the start of each round, and I think it works well. In the future, I might even consider making the initiative roll be a d10 or maybe a d12, putting more emphasis on the player's choice and decreasing randomness. Now, one thing that doesn't have is simultaneous action, but it could, and in fact AD&D had that and we could add it back in. I remember that in AD&D the initiative rolls were made at the start of each round of battle, but initiative was only the roll of a d10 for each side in combat, and the side that rolled lowest went first. That did embrace some amount of randomness and did mean that one side might be able to go twice before the other in combat, which could certainly be a decisive factor. The system also explicitly made it possible for both sides to act simultaneously if both sides both happen to roll the same number. It says, if both or all sides roll the same number for initiative, everything happens simultaneously. All attack rolls, damage spells, and other actions are completed before any results are applied. It is possible for a wizard to be slain by goblins who collapse from his sleep spell at the end of the same round. Being that there's a 10% chance that the two d10s will roll the same number, the simultaneous action should be reasonably common, something that you see happen definitely from time to time in combat. If you're doing an individual initiative system, then just apply the
same rule to everyone who goes on the same initiative number. All actions on that number are considered simultaneous, and so all of their actions are resolved before the effects of those actions are applied. I'm running out of time for this video, but a discussion of initiative wouldn't be complete without mentioning the Hackmaster system. I got a chance to play Hackmaster at Gen Con with David Kenzer,
I love the Hackmaster Initiative system. I love the Hackmaster Initiative system. And by the way, I just put out on YouTube to all the channel members, I just put a post out to the YouTube community channel. So I posted a YouTube post. You know, if you go to community on YouTube, I posted the link to this stream. So if you are a channel member and you have thoughts on this and you want to talk about it, I just posted the link so you can click that link and you can come in, and then I will invite you on the stream and you can talk about this live. So if you have ideas or thoughts that you want to share conversationally about realism and RPG combat and you are a channel member, I just posted that link on YouTube to the community tab for members only. So that is there. So if you want to come on the stream, look for it there, and then I'll bring you on as soon as all of this is done. But I love the Hackmaster Initiative system. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment. I don't know Sorcerer. Steel Mongoose says, I have to go again. Can't wait to get up on full recordings. Oh, well, come back. All right, we'll look for you. It's been great to have you, Steel Mongoose. Looking forward to having you coming back. Grimhild says, I like a lot of indie-style games. Dogs in the Vineyard. Don't Resist Your Head. I don't know either one of those. Played Sorcerer like 15 years ago, but unfortunately didn't get to play as much as I wanted. I love it when Twincast says, I love it when quicker characters get to act more often. All right. Well, all right. Zero Theory. All right. You want to come in? Like, we still have some time. I will still go through this. There's still some more stuff to go through here, but I went ahead and put out that link to the channel members so that you can go ahead and get to the computer and stuff like that. That's fine. We still have like, I don't know, like probably 10 or 12 minutes to go here, but, come on in if you want to. That's the link.
Creator of the system, and I had a great time with it. I want to get into the system in more detail than I have time for here, but for now, what we should do is note that the Hackmaster system measures time in seconds, and whatever the character can do at a certain time, they simply do. According to Hackmaster, much like in real life, your Hackmaster character can attempt any action he wants at any time. For instance, in real life, to walk across a room, you think about doing so, start moving, and after a certain number of seconds, you accomplish the task. Likewise, in Hackmaster, if your character wants to take an action, such as crossing the tavern floor, you simply declare his intent, and after a certain amount of time, if there are no unexpected obstacles, he completes his action. Thus, Hackmaster has no artificial time segmentation such as turns, rounds, segments, or phases. In Hackmaster, your character's actions are measured in seconds by time and time alone. For instance, once a character or monster rolls starting initiative, the GM begins counting from 1 and up, each unit representing a second in time ticking away, as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. When the count up reaches the character's starting initiative number, the controlling player may announce an action. Each action takes a certain amount of time. When you're done with one action, you can start another, and when the amount of time has passed to do that action, then you do it. For movement, each character has a number of feet they can move per second, so each second, if you want to move, you just move. This is best done with miniatures at the table. I didn't quite get this when I first started playing. The GM started the count up, and I just sat there. On each count, the other players were reaching in and moving their miniatures on the table. That's when I realized I was supposed to be doing that too. My hesitation meant that my character had stood there out of the action for several seconds when the combat began. Now, there are a lot of things to remember in the Hackmaster system, but there's a lot I like about it. So later I do want to look at it and see how its core can be used, but perhaps simplified and streamlined, but that'll have to wait till another video. So that wraps up this look at Initiative and Choice. If you've enjoyed it, please go back to my YouTube channel. I've got
I don't understand why more systems don't use what Hackmaster's got. I mean, Hackmaster should. Like, if you haven't played, I'm telling you, one of the most fun, or one of the most fun times I've ever had at a game was playing a Hackmaster game with the creators of Hackmaster, using that initiative system at Gen Con. I was playing over at the oh, I forget the name of the company, but at the Hackmaster table, and he was hosting us all, and I was sitting there, and we were just doing a quick play of going through a dungeon, and I was playing one of the clerics and stuff like that. And it was so much fun. It was so much fun because we all acted simultaneously. There was an initiative count. I absolutely loved it. I don't know why more people aren't doing that. Because I really enjoyed it. James is going to be on here in a minute here. James Sable Phoenix says, okay, so go to, if you go to my YouTube channel and then go to community, like the community tab, then you will see that link. Because I don't want to post it here because this is a public live stream. But if you go to the my YouTube channel on like a separate browser and then go to community, if you're a channel member, you'll see a post there that has the link to come in. So James has got it. Grimhild says, I used to be a Mormon, so I could channel a lot of my frustration with the church into my character being an absolute monster in the name of God. Very cathartic. Oh, sometimes we've been talking about having a lot of discussion about good and evil on this channel, and we don't have Mormons on the channel yet. So maybe one day, Grimhild, you could come on. Dogs in the Vineyard is very Mormon settlers with the serial numbers filed off. Tomocrat says, I'm in mass media and I'm shy. Go figure. By the way, you don't have to be video. On this software that we've got here, if you're a channel member and you want to come on and you have thoughts, you don't have to have your video on. You can just have audio on. A lot of people just do audio, so you can come on and be audio only. That's no problem. Oh, we got James Bacon and Zero the Blade and Sable Phoenix coming on. All right, I'm going to bring them on when we finish this talk because there's still a few more minutes of this video to go, so we'll bring them on. Pan Smith says, greatest system ever. I have never run a turn-based system after Hackmast and Aces. Yeah, I know. And I don't understand why that's not taking over the world. I don't understand that because I hear that, Pan Smith, from so many people because I'm the same one. And I'm like, oh my God, I had so much fun with the Hackmaster initiative system. Why aren't more people doing that? Well, no. Okay, I think, now tell me if I'm wrong, I think there are two different versions of Hackmaster. Because what I have, this is the version that I have. Because I think it did start as a spoof. It did start as a spoof. But then there was another edition that is not a spoof. So I am talking about the edition that's not a spoof. Okay? So this is the version that I have right here. So this version is not a spoof. It's actually a serious role-playing game. They call it specifically, what's his version number so I can find it? Hackmaster Player's Handbook. Well, I don't see it. But I think you're right. The original Hackmaster was a spoof, but then there's a serious RPG that comes out. And now there are things I like about it. There are things I don't like about it. There's it's definitely old school in a lot of ways that I would like to clean up if I were writing a more modern RPG. But the initiative system is what wins. Oh, well, come on. I would love to have you more in the future, Sean. Yeah, well, you can totally come on audio. Well, that's fine. Just find audio. Okay, fifth edition Hackmaster. Fourth edition is the spoof. So I must be holding 5th edition then, because Pan Smith says 5th edition is the serious one. So I'm holding the serious one. Okay, let's continue here.
Lots of other videos on tabletop gaming that you'll probably like as well. In the next video, I will get into narrating combat actions as a component to more realistic RPG combat. See you then. Welcome to the 6th video in our series on realism and RPG combat, where we are going over and then doing some commentary on the essay by John Clements from 2003, and in this video we're going to be talking about narrating combat to preserve realism and suspense. So let's go on. Those were his 5 key points, and then he continues on with some other commentary. Notice nowhere in these suggested 5 key points have I addressed anything about game mechanics or weapon or armor statistics. That's not my concern. I leave that up to the innovative game designers and their respective players. With regard to hit points, I am also not concerned. In real life, we just have 1 hit point, and if we lose it, we're gone. But clearly, people of different builds and body sizes and even temperaments can withstand varying ranges of physical trauma more so than others. But in a game, for playability, we need abstraction, and thus, virtually any system for accounting for hit points is acceptable. Okay, yeah, we're not talking about statistics here for weapons or armor, and we could really get into the hit point stuff, and of course a lot of people have in a lot of places, but I don't think here is the time to really dig into a hit point discussion. So that was his opinion on the subject. He goes on. Some game masters like to rely on a chart or different table to answer every possible combat situation and incorporate rules down to a science specific for every kind of specific action or attack called. To me, this is an overly technical approach that considerably distorts realism instead of helping it. This sounds like a critique of Rollmaster. Things like dodging, parrying, deflecting, closing in, grappling, disarming, tripping, etc. are not specialized skills or feats that one fighter has and another doesn't. They are foundational aspects of fighting itself. Fighting with weapons is not just simple parry and riposte. In my opinion, the role of Game Master is to narrate and describe combat action and results by interpreting the dice rolls and modifiers along with the scene. For example, if a player says something like, "I want to stab at that orc just as he raises his axe to chop at me, so I'm grabbing my pommel with my other hand for strength and aim, and I'm shoving my sword right into his exposed armpit to sever his major arteries." To this enthusiastic effort, the Game Master might just respond, "Yeah, okay, just roll the dice," and then follow the numbers to decide if there was any hit or damage. The Game Master could also try searching for...
I would love to hear about people, because that's my situation. I would love to hear from people who have a different kind of take on that. Because when you're dealing with a very mechanical system like 5th edition, like sometimes the Game Master says, roll something, tell us what's going on. But everybody's like, oh my God, okay, it doesn't matter because the dice have already told us what happened. Like, let's just get on with it. And like, it's annoying to have the description. I would love to talk about with people, maybe our panelists here, what
rule and table covering high outside double-handed arm thrusts aimed at the underarm when employed with a bastard sword against male armor. Or, after looking at the results of the roll and damage, the Game Master could simply reply with something along the lines of, "Okay, great. As the orc lifts his arm to hack at your head, you make your move and your sword point jams deep into his underarm, splintering some links in his mail armor and finding the meat of his orcish hide and muscle. But his forearm motion disrupts your timing and aim a little bit, and the stab only just wounds him. The tension is sustained, the excitement is allowed to express itself, and realism is embraced." I have my own opinion on this kind of narration of combat and whether or not it helps or whether or not it hurts. And whether or not I find most players like it or not, and how exactly they should relate to the dice rolls. I think that's a whole subject we could talk about on its own. In the orc example here, my issue is that I think that the tension is not sustained through that. The tension is resolved and dissipates as soon as the dice are rolled, because the player knows whether they rolled well and did a lot of damage to that orc or they didn't. That's resolving the tension of that attack. I suppose there might be a little bit of tension as to whether or not the Game Master is going to say, okay, the orc is dead, regardless of how much damage was done or how little was done. If maybe the orc had taken damage earlier in the battle and might only have a couple of hit points left. But at any rate, arguably the tension isn't maintained after the dice roll through the narrative description. I suppose it could work if the Game Master was the one who was rolling the damage dice behind the screen, so the players never knew what the result of the damage die was. Then the narrative description of what happened to the orc would be much more meaningful, intense, and impactful. And although the Game Master is accounting for all of the hit points behind the screen, the players would have to rely on the Game Master's narrative description to understand what had happened to their foe and what else was going on in combat. That's an interesting idea. Because of course you do have the great narration that the player here is giving you of what they're going to try to do, but then if you're playing something like AD&D, especially at the time this was written, well, then you're going to roll, and then the Game Master provides this interpretation, this narrative interpretation of the dice roll. A lot of times, though, so many dice are being thrown, what I basically feel is that players want to skip all that, because once the die is rolled and they know how much damage the orc is taking, they want to move on. The nice narrative description of the combat is something that's kind of dragging things out because we've got more dice to roll, and I find that many players don't really want it, and they know that giving their nice flowery description of their attack isn't changing anything mechanical in the game about whether or not they're going to be able to defeat that orc or not. Now, I don't necessarily think that's good. In fact, I think that could be, and arguably is, a flaw in some RPG combat systems, like hit point-based systems, particularly inflationary hit point-based systems like Dungeons and Dragons. To others, it won't be. It'll be just fine, and they like it. But I think it could be argued that that's a flaw that gets in the way for this. But I think that's a deeper conversation. But clearly this is what he thinks about adding realism to RPG combat by interpreting the dice rolls. He goes on, though, but arguably very few individuals, even among the community of historical fencing enthusiasts and Renaissance martial artists, have sufficient experience in the subject of historical combat to do this kind of interpretive combat narration, or at least to do it entertainingly for their players. Many lack realistic knowledge of the true characteristics and attributes of genuine historical arms and armor, as well as the actual wounding effects of real weapons on flesh, let alone understanding something of the nature of personal armed combat. And for that matter, they really shouldn't be expected to know.
Well, we talk about that quite a bit here on the channel as well, because we're talking about like how much is the game master and the player supposed to be able to come up with on the fly. Right? That there's some systems where you're supposed to come up with a lot on the fly, but if you're not really familiar with those, like, armed combat, then how realistic is it to expect that you're able to do that? Like, I'm against that kind of thing.
Either in order to run a good adventure. I kind of think this is a weird paragraph. It is certainly true that most people playing games don't have comprehensive understandings of all of that. And I would say it's also true that you shouldn't be expected to have all of that in order to run a good adventure. And so any system that is relying on a game master or a player to have that, that would definitely be a negative, I would think. I would think in today's world, though, especially with YouTube and a lot of different things, many gamers will have more information on the subject than they did at the time that this essay was written. Oh, look, he does say this essay was revised in 2003, July 12th, 2003. So we're looking at an essay from 2003. So by this time, my gaming group would have made the switch from AD&D over to 3rd edition, and we would have been playing that. He goes on to say, yet there are some basic fundamental truths about historical fencing and the use of arms and armor that I feel can and should be addressed within the combat of serious RPGs. Many game combat systems or specific rules in them are founded upon certain core assumptions regarding arms and fighting that I believe are just plain wrong, and in some cases downright absurd. But while we want to avoid futile attempts to creating a simulation of personal combat in a game, I am strongly convinced gamers can still utilize a large degree of historical source material on fighting to enrich their gaming experience. To use an analogy, consider Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien's writings are exceptional and surely the pinnacle of fantasy literature. Why? Because in creating his world and stories, Tolkien grounded himself in the reality of historical folklore, mythology, and real languages. He didn't sit around and make it all up from scratch. He relied on an incredible wealth of existing materials from which to draw upon. The results speak for themselves. The same needs to be done in RPG combat. And here we have numerous existing, though little-known, resources from historical European martial arts to rely on. And he directs you to the arma.org website. He concludes, personally, like many, I've tried my hand at making my own fantasy role-playing game combat system once or twice in the past. Sometimes I wanted a way whereby I could make my to-hit roll and my damage roll one and the same. Other times I wanted to be able to do it in 2 separate rolls, so I might rely on those wonderful polyhedral dice for the variety of different weapons and monsters. Gotta love those Pythagorean solids. But in each design, I always tried to include the above 5 points in order to approximate the desired feel of realism without sacrificing the necessary feel of a good game. The results were both fun and rewarding. I guess I'll note that I've thought about the same things, and that's probably something that a lot of game designers go back and forth on. Should your hit and damage all be resolved in one roll, or should those be divided out? There are arguments for both, of course, and I'm sure we will get into a lot of them in later videos. So he's probably not unique in going back and forth on that particular design point. So there he does say that about the author, John Clements is one of America's leading instructors and foremost practitioner researchers of Renaissance martial arts. He has studied the subject for over 23 years and researched and taught in 6 countries. He's the director of ARMA, the Association for Renaissance Martial Arts, and is the author of Renaissance Swordsmanship, the Illustrated Use of Rapiers and Cut and Thrust Swords, and Medieval Swordsmanship, Illustrated Techniques and Methods, both from Paladin Press. He writes and teaches on historical fencing, full-time in Houston, Texas, and occasionally consults for the gaming industry. So okay, that was, I think, an interesting blast from the past. I only vaguely remembered...
All right. So yeah, so that's it. So that was the essay. So I think let's go over here and come up with our impromptu panel. I love this. I love being able to do this. That's why I love the live format. So let's bring on, first of all, so I'm going to bring up my camera here. So this is the this is finally my camera. I'm trying to paint some Stark infantry here. But let's welcome everyone. Please welcome our impromptu panel here. James Bacon. Welcome, James. It is so good to have you. You are now live. Zero the Blade. Welcome, Zero the Blade.
Konbawa.
And then also Sable Phoenix. Welcome, Sable Phoenix. All
Good
right. So we are all now live. I was just looking at some of the things that people were saying also in the comments here, because like Grimhild was saying, hit points don't make much sense. So we're talking about the hit point situation. Hit points don't make much sense being abstract when someone falls 100 feet or walk into lava or is tied up and someone pushes a dagger into their eye. Like we talk about that a lot, it seems like, on the channel.
I agree with that. It also deflates tension. It also deflates tension, like when an orc, and I said this in the comments, when an orc cuts like a 5 hit point hunk out of your back out of 55 hit points, it's like, well, who cares?
Yeah, that's basically considered a paper cut at that point. Now, I don't know if Sable or Bacon has a heavy martial arts background like me.
No, sir.
Okay, well,
what is your background, Zero?
I studied Taekwondo, Karate, Muay Thai, and Judo. So,
okay.
Now, the thing about Karate, and I have actually mastered this technique known as organ guard, to where, let's say somebody decides to take a stab underneath my ribcage. I have learned to actually take my lower organs and actually raise them up into my ribcage. It's painful for the first minute, but I have protected myself. So I have given myself a bit of additional armor, as to say, for my own safety. So I can kind of see how an injury like that would change depending on where you got hit and how well you can defend yourself from it.
So organ guard, you said, is the technique?
Yes.
That's cool.
Granted, the translated name means organ rise.
Okay.
Because you're literally rising your organs into your rib cage.
I have never heard of that.
I lived in Japan for a year, so that's where my karate training comes from.
Cool. Mm-hmm. I don't have that level of training for sure. I've taken Aikido.
Yeah, but basically Japanese weaponry and martial arts are my specialty. So that's where, again, this whole European to Asian weapons is kind of problematic for me because the weapons themselves have been designed very differently from each other. Like, my weapon of choice is a katana. A katana is basically an extremely long axe, in a way, made for literally just chopping limbs off. Now, there was a comment about me asking about specialty weapons, like the legendary Zanpakuto, aka the horse slaying sword. That was made, granted, it is a 9-foot minimum length blade designed to kill horse and rider in one swing. So that's where my question about how would that interpret to a tabletop role-playing game when you have a weapon literally made to kill cavalry in one swing compared to a normal longsword.
Well, I would.
So that's
well,
like
I would
almost like a flamberge.
how would you represent that? Yeah, I mean, I would go the other way. It's like, well, okay, if you were designing a role-playing game and you're saying this is what the weapon is, how would that be designed? PH says, okay, that's what I do. My system has a pool of D6s. The number of D6s is equal to the attribute being used. The success number roll equals the character skill. Each success is a description.
Right, but here's a counter argument to that is,
okay,
there is a special dagger known as the Swordbreaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Swordbreaker.
Yeah, and you are aware that its primary purpose is blade deflection. Because of the serrated backside, it is made to capture, lock, and redirect weapons. So there's a question on the AC portion is, if somebody has that, would that count as a boost or as a so-called reaction to adding it?
Well, or does it allow the character to take certain actions? Because like could you take certain actions in combat if you are wielding a sword breaker that you would not otherwise be able to?
And that's where a feat known as defensive duelist sort of comes into play here, where it's like, okay, you basically take your, I think it was like proficiency or dex or something else, and you get to add it to your AC for a turn for that. So it's like, what if you have a weapon that is literally made to do that all the time? How does that work? Do you just add more AC to it?
Well, if you wanted to model the actual binding of the opponent's weapon, that sword breakers or similar things like a sai, for example,
yes,
or what have you.
Yes, I am well aware of the size, even though a lot of people don't know where they originally came from.
Right, but that's where, to properly model it, then you're looking at an opposed role of some kind, I would say. Where if you can say if you can roll a defense that beats their attack by a certain amount, then you can actually either disarm them or say cancel their attack action next round, that kind of thing.
So in other words, it would almost be like incorporating a monk ability there, except it would be melee instead of range.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
It could be.
I mean, I would treat a Swordbreaker like a main gosh or a triple dagger. It would just have different capabilities, I think. I mean, it's pretty much purely a defensive weapon. So I'd call it active defense, and I don't know. I'm not going to whip rules up for it on the spot. I don't know that. I'm not that good. That's how I would treat it. I would treat it as a purely defensive weapon.
Well, okay, so let's talk about some of the things that. Well, let's see. Let's go over here to see what's going on in the comments here. Mad likes the indication of Pythagorean solemns. Nothing is worse than a successful attack than roll 2 damage. Yeah, so I mean, what do we think about that? What do we think about separating damage rolls and attack rolls? Because I go back and forth on this as well. Because okay, you make an extremely successful attack and then you roll very low on damage.
Yes, and this is the one thing about Dungeons and Dragons that really irks me, is that because I had a paladin in my party one time, used his 5th level spell slot for smite. Guess what the damage roll was?
Well,
7.
Okay.
With a 5th level smite, ouch.
Yes.
Sounds like I'm playing that paladin. Things like that happen to me all the time. Which
Sounds
is
like
why
those dice need to go to jail.
Or that's why I'm so big on reducing randomness in RPGs. That like, is that something that should happen? Like, because people are like, well, it'll only happen, 20% of the time or whatever actually the stats are. But that means that it does happen. So when it does happen, it really sucks. So it's fine when you're designing the game to go, oh, that happens 20% of the time or whatever. But is that actually something that you want to happen?
I mean, I can kind of see it functioning with a bludgeoning weapon more than a slashing weapon. Because, yeah, if the person has armor and you apply the so-called resistance, yeah, the 7 would make sense. But if the person, unless it's full plate, yeah, I do kind of see the sword making way more, even if it's imbued with magical powers.
Well, that also depends too. Like, for slashing weapons, Gambeson pretty much negates most of that.
I like.
It doesn't necessarily require
5th edition feat for organ shifting. Yeah, that's. I have never heard of organ shifting. That's. So that does sound kind of like a feat. That could be handled by a feat in certain systems.
Mm-hmm. But
So what about active defense? So we've talked about this not live, but we have talked about it on the morning grind. Because Twincast says if the defending combatant is to be treated as an active participant, you pretty much need opposed rolls. Yeah.
Right, and that's where the game system powered by the apocalypse comes into play. Is where you don't make attack rolls.
You make moves.
Make defense rolls. And that defense roll determines if you don't get hit, you get hit, or you just took a boot up the rear.
Well, because all the rolls are in PBTA, all the rolls are player facing. The GM doesn't roll at all.
Yeah, that's a different kind of thing. If you're talking about all player facing roles, or if you're talking about, well, should we have active defense? Those are different questions. Tom McCrat says I had a friend who hated the 3rd edition crits rules because he never confirmed the crits.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, because if it's random, then it could happen. That okay, no, you crit. Oh no, now roll to confirm that. Yeah. Twincast says I believe most of us agree that D&D is too random at most things. See, well, that's the argument I have been making. I don't know if most of us agree that, but I have certainly been making that argument.
Yeah,
I certainly agree.
Ever since that 7 damage 5th level smite, it's like, dude, I'm buying you a new set of dice because you're the paladin. You're supposed to be able to just kill things with your smites, and yet you basically gave this guy a love tap.
So that's an argument for. I mean, that's an argument for reduced randomness. We're talking about here an argument for reduced randomness. And I see, like, I was looking at somebody today who was talking about dice and games, and even the Mark Tassin, when he's working on the Cool Name RPG, is talking about dice and RPGs. It just seems like everyone is working on dice-based probabilities for RPGs without the realization about what you're talking about. I think Zero, that like, okay, at this level, you are supposed to be able to do X. So if you can't do X, then there's a problem.
Right.
Now, because if you have, there's an 80% chance of you're doing X, that still means that 20% of the time you're not. And by the way, if you think that if just because you rolled 1 to 20 on that time, if you're doing a percentile roll, that you can't do it again, that's the gambler's fallacy. There can be an 80% chance that you're going to do something, but that if you have to do that 4 times in a row, you can fail every time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, what the frack? Right. I mean, that's where that's going. And I understand that argument. It's like, wait a minute, that's not like I sat here, especially if that turn takes a long time for you to come around, you know, and you don't want to miss 4 times in a row if it's an 80% chance. You're like, you feel useless. You want to be able to do what your character is supposed to be able to do. PH says, I believe attack and damage should be taken from the same roll. I've been looking at, I've been working on for this is still very early, but for Faded Edge, integrating damage and attack. PHR Bless says, I believe attack and damage should be taken from the same roll, or the damage roll gets all the exceeding number above the minimum to hit for the attack roll. So if you attack really well, that means that you do a lot of damage.
Right, and that is one thing that I do agree with PH is weapons should have a standard damage value, and depending on how skilled you are, you can actually add to that.
There's having the attack and damage all integrated into a single roll is what Paragons and Prowlers does, which is a
what is that like?
Paragons and Prowlers is a superhero system, and when you build your character, you get to decide how many d6s of an effect your powers have, and then whenever you're rolling to determine the effect of your powers, it's a d6 pool, and every I think it's every 4, 5, or 6 is a success, and that's also the amount of effect you can apply with your powers. So, like if you're fighting a whole bunch of minions, you roll your fire blast power or whatever that has 76, and you roll, say 4 of them get a 4, 5, or a 6, then you get to take out, you take out 4 minions just like that. So it makes it super fast.
How do we, if we're talking about automatic damage and things like that, what's the argument against that if people are saying, well, it's got to be exciting, we got to roll to see if that's possible? Like, is it fun to say, because I was thinking about, when we were talking about on the morning grind, Hercules fighting goblins. Like, shouldn't Hercules be able to take out goblins every round?
Well,
is that fun for the player playing Hercules?
Well, okay, this raises another one of my comments about distances and how close the person is, because again, in martial arts, we need to either be able to just snap our limbs into the position we need them to be in, or we arch our limbs similar to how we arch weapons to build up more power. Because if you take a polearm based weapon and compare it to a dagger, yeah, the polearm is superior in reach, but if I'm right up next to somebody, that dagger is way more deadlier than that polearm ever will be.
Yes. So that's an argument. I mean, I agree with that. So that's an argument that's another level. Range. That's not only comparing your weapon to the other person's weapon. It's comparing your weapon to the other person's weapon based on range, which is putting a third axis into this table. I mean, which can be done, but it's also asking, okay, how much do you want to add as far as the game goes?
Right, and this
Who's
is where
doing that?
the whole Goblin versus Hercules things comes into play, where it's like Hercules is like this, 9, 8, 9, 10-foot tall man trying to hit somebody who is like 3 feet tall.
Well, and he's a demigod.
Yeah, but he still needs to go for one massive arc of his arm to do that. So the Goblin basically is like, yeah, if I get close enough to you, swinging your arm's not going to do much. The best thing you can do is literally try and punt me halfway across the damn planet.
That's where the strength of narrative systems starts to come in, I think. It's because it gives you the flexibility to do, it gives the flexibility for Hercules to still apply his demigod skill, and rather than relying on, we're simulating the reach of the of the longsword that you're carrying. It's just, I just drop kick him instead.
Because narratively, okay, either way, Hercules takes care of the goblin.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter, right? And yeah, I'm tending to say no. Okay, Hercules, Hercules in that situation takes care of the goblin. Narrate how that's whether that's punting him or whether that's taking care of him with the sword. I'm tending to go in that direction, but I realize, I mean, that's not all gaming, of course. Well, what else? What else do we have here? We go for a few more minutes. What about things like weapons and armor dynamics?
And that's
D&D very low on that.
And that's another question I have.
Well,
okay.
Depends on the edition of D&D too.
Right, and not only that, but certain armors were made to withstand certain attributes of that. For example, chainmail was made to endure slashing damage, but is garbage against piercing strikes. But like you were saying, Sable, about that Gafner armor.
Gambison?
Gambison, yeah.
Yeah, it was made to endure slashing damage, but how would it deal with bludgeoning damage or something?
Well, Gambison is just padded. It's cloth armor.
It's leather. Pardon me, not leather. It's linen. It's layered linen, and
exactly.
it can prevent piercing damage. It can prevent slashing damage. Like
it's actually it can almost completely negate any kind of slashing damage. Because have you ever tried to cut through through like 6 layers of thick cloth with a knife? It's not easy.
It can withstand longbow arrows as well.
Yeah, it's actually very decent armor against most types of sharp implements. Its biggest weakness, honestly, with most armor types, is just straight up impact.
Oh, so it's very similar to the bamboo armor I'm used to training in.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about like how our knowledge of historical armors, I mean, that's something that's only come online relatively recently.
True.
I mean, when they were designing D&D in the 70s, we didn't have the knowledge of Gambison versus longbows that we can watch on YouTube today. I mean, there was a lot of, weirdness there. And now we are seeing that today. But on the other hand, how much can you trust something on YouTube?
I mean, let alone as far as the power of weapons as well. Because there are some channels that actually compare different eras as well as different countries' weapons. Like comparing a longsword to the katana again, yeah, they can both do some major damage, but depending on how they're forged, one's better in piercing than the other. So it's like, how does that incorporate?
But then also, I've seen things on like the History Channel, which is just ridiculous. The History Channel that people are talking about, like, let's see how this works against mail, except for they're using like reenactment grade butted mail, which is not anything like, and so it's this cool show, but it's like, okay, yeah, that just got torn apart, but that isn't actually what armor would have been made out of.
Right.
So just because you see that, like they've got some, you would want the History Channel.
It's almost considered a prop item, and they're trying to
right. It's just showing you against a prop item. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. It's because we don't actually use it in combat. We don't know. I know. A Twin Cast said studded leather arm. I know. I shudder too. I'm here. I hear you. I shudder. Grimhild says a resource management game could support narrative heroic storytelling better than a dice game.
I was just going to point that comment out. I 100%.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Agree with that.
Speak on it then. Speak on it. Absolutely.
So I am currently developing. It's going to be a unique system. It's not going to be like some kind of universal system, but I'm currently developing a system where hits are automatic, and then there is still a random element because randomness is fun. But what you're going to do is manage resources to determine exactly how hard you want to hit, or maybe exactly where you want to hit, or how you hit, or what you hit with. This is not a fantasy setting. This is more like anime mecha sort of stuff. So like you'll be draining a battery in order to put that resource into an attack, and then there will be a random result on the part of what you're attacking to determine whether or not the hit was like glancing or deflected or a strong hit or a penetrating hit or something along those lines. And the reason that it's that way is because I find that the resource management, it's an important decision for the player to make, so it's engaging. B, it's faster than rolling a ton of dice and adding everything up. And C, it just seems to be more narratively satisfying, in my opinion. I haven't play tested yet, so we'll see. But I agree with this point 100%.
Well, if you're managing a certain number of resources, I agree. Like I talk about that quite a bit. That if you're managing a small number of resources or regionally small number of resources that all matter, I think that can make a good game.
Yeah, I think
so
that's what you're doing. I think really what it hinges on, like engaging the player, is having them make important decisions. I think every decision that they make should be an important decision. Like, jumping across a gap it's not really important. It's not exciting. Nothing's going to happen if they fall. They're just going to get up and try again. But if the decision you're making is draining a battery that now you have fewer resources to continue fighting with in order to, potentially end the battle sooner, if you don't end that battle, then it becomes a very interesting decision moving forward. And if you do end the battle, then, hey, you made the right decision and it feels good. And it's just, I feel like that engaging with the player in that sort of way and giving them the tools that they need to make important decisions and trying to make every decision important, I feel like is really, it's sort of the crux. It's at least how I'm approaching what I think good gameplay is.
Well, and that's okay. We talk about that a lot in the morning grind, and that's just different gameplay philosophies. Why do you want to win this game? And we'll say conquer, attack the dragon, kill the dragon, whatever it is you're trying to do. Why do you want to do that? Do you want to do that because your characters have made good decisions, or do you want to make that because you were good at rolling dice this session? That's just, there's no right answer. That's just different people's philosophy on gameplay.
Yes.
Like Grimhild says, the randomness can be fun, but only to a limit.
Yeah, I agree. And like all of the random elements that I'm trying to add, I'm trying to allow for them to be very interesting and sort of adjust the game in narratively satisfying ways that the player then will have to make additional important decisions to either mitigate or follow through, etc.
You should look at Lancer.
I will look at that right now.
It is a mech combat RPG.
The history of Twincast says the History Channel was good for maybe 5 years back in the day. There was a time when it was good. But then, yes, it lost it, like many TV channels.
Also,
it was fun hanging out with you, Grimhild.
I'm totally on board with the idea of resource allocation. I cannot recommend, because I've been trying to fiddle around with designing my own game mechanics as well, and I find myself leaning more and more to that idea. And I think a big influence on that was the game I've mentioned in a couple of the streams a few times. Is called Phoenix Dawn Command.
Oh, no, I don't remember that one.
Phoenix Dawn Command is a deck building RPG, and was made by Troy Baker, who created the Eberron campaign setting for 3rd edition. and it's a brilliantly designed game. You can tell that he put it together to address a lot of the foibles of the D20, your typical D20 resolution mechanics. Things like character levels and the fact that you don't want your character to die. If you die, it's game over, kind of a thing, and all sorts of cool. He came up with all sorts of cool solutions. But as far as the resolution mechanics go and applying resources, you have your character is a deck of cards, and you have 3 suits of cards. You have intellect, might, and grace, and depending on which type of character you're playing an immortal. Depending on which type of character you're playing, you get 2 of those suits. Every character has the grace suit, and then one of the others, either might or intellect. And you draw 5 cards at the beginning of your turn, and you have, in each card, obviously, it has a value anywhere from 1 to 5. Plus, you also get special cards that have special abilities, depending on your class. And you want to build your highest spread that you can with what you have in your hand whenever you want to do something. And so the amounts go typically in divisions of 5 all the way up to 30. And if you can get to 30 or more, then you get a legendary success, and then there are different tiers depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish below that. And if you're talking about it in combat, then you can spend your cards to make a spread to defend against damage, but then you don't have those to spend on your attacking or creating your own effects later on until you draw again at the end of your next turn. So you have a finite pool of resources to do everything that you need to do, and you just have to. It becomes a resource allocation game. I cannot recommend that game highly enough. I would.
What was the name of it? What did you say the name of it was?
Phoenix Dawn Command.
Phoenix Dawn Command. Okay, I'm going to make note of this over here.
You play as a type of immortal character called a Phoenix, and that's the other cool thing about it too. Is as a side note, not mechanically speaking, but the idea that when your character dies, it's game over. No, not in Phoenix Dawn Command. In Phoenix Dawn Command, you have to die to level up, because then you come back and you're now a level 2 Phoenix, and if you die again, you'll come back as a level 3 Phoenix, and all the way up until you get to level 7. But you get 7 lives essentially.
Well, that's interesting. I was going to say that when you talked about the relationship with death, so this is a very different relationship with death. Like we'll wrap this up here in just a moment, but I think this is an interesting topic to end on. Then when we're talking about realism in combat or any type of combat in RPG, isn't understanding what the character's relationships with death is important?
Yeah.
Like depending on what that is it can depend on what it means to be realistic or whether you want realism or anything like that, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on. I mean, some games get around it, like a lot of horror games, like 10 Candles or Call of Cthulhu. You know you're going to die, right? Everybody's doomed when they start the game. On the other hand, you have kind of further up on the scale, you have the OSR where death is expected, but it's not really that big of a deal because it takes you like 3 minutes to roll up another character and you jump right back in. And then you have other games that are like kind of in that weird halfway space, like 5e, where people invest in these characters and their stories in a huge way. And it's hard to kill the character, but it can happen. If it does, well, then that story is over. And then what do you do?
That story's over, right?
But
And then you're like,
and then
well,
you go,
I was supposed to be invested.
but then you go to the greater extreme, to things like a lot of the PBTA games or Fate or whatever, where the character can suffer all these consequences, but they only die when the player says they do. Because that's what's dramatically appropriate at the time, unless something, depending on the system, unless something really drastic happens. It's like, okay, well, you can't survive that, but they still get the chance to narrate how they go out. So there's a definite spectrum.
What kind of games do y'all prefer, with as far as your relationship to death goes? What do you prefer?
Honestly, it depends. To me, it depends on the setting, and I think that a really excellent system. It's really hard to make a general. In my opinion, it's really hard to make a general core system that does everything really well. Because 10 Candles is the perfect example. 10 Candles is
look at that.
Super evocative. I absolutely love that game. Absolutely love it. It's brilliant. Everybody knows they're going to die at the end. Literally, it says it. You will not make it out of this alive. Your characters are going to die. That is the resolution of the story. It is a one-shot game. Every session ends with a complete party wipe, basically, because it's a horror game. So the mechanics are built to increase that sense of encroaching doom. Whereas something like Savage Worlds, which is high action, high octane kind of Hollywood style action movie heroes, it can be really swingy, and it is possible to just get taken out. I've had, especially if an enemy gets the drop on you. But generally speaking, it's really, really hard to kill a character outright in that system. Even though once you get injured, you start getting into this kind of death spiral that drops your effectiveness, but it's still really hard to kill a character outright because it's like an action movie. You're John McClane. So it depends. To me, it depends. What's the mood of the game? What's the style of the game? What's the setting? What is it? What kind of emotions do you want to invoke?
Well, it seems to me like most of the time I'm playing in games that are less campaign and more one-shot. It's not quite just one-shot, but, we're never going to go to level 20. So I guess I'm okay with more death hanging over our heads.
Yeah, and for me, it would depend on, I have 2 PCs that I have basically invested, almost an encyclopedia of lore in. But I have, 3 binders of character sheets that are okay, if this one dies, the sheet can burn in the pitch of water, and I don't care.
Okay, so you do both.
Yeah.
I tend to like games like Call of Cthulhu, which have very sort of regarding what Sable Phoenix said about the death, the character death, how it says up front you're going to die, or like Call of Cthulhu says you're going to go insane. I find that tension relief right up front at the beginning, yeah, you're going to die. I find that really fun enabling because you're going to die anyway. It doesn't mean you're not going to try to perform the actions you want to perform, but having that up front, I find to be extremely important, at least for my fun factor. So Call of Cthulhu, I also don't like, and we've discussed this, the exponential adding of hit points as you gain levels just doesn't do it for me, because over time it completely destroys the tension of the game. And again, that's why I like Call of Cthulhu, because you get shot, you're dead. You get stabbed, you're dead. Everything's going to kill you, and it's going to kill you in one shot. And I just find those sorts of games. So any system really that caters to those 2 major points, I enjoy.
I think that's a big strength of PBTA games too. It's like harm is like, depending on the setting, like Monster of the Week, you have 7 harm. And if you get 4, then you're incapacitated. And if you get 7, you're dead. And it doesn't matter what level, quote unquote, you are, because leveling is handled a little bit differently in those games. You only ever have 7 harm. And stuff will be hitting you for 3 or 4 harm a lot of the time. So,
and that do you carry that 7 harm across like multiple games?
And yeah, you have to have ways to get rid of the harm.
I see. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah, if you take 4 harm, you're only going to get rid of maybe 1 or 2 of it before the next session.
I like that.
Yeah. So,
but managing the expectation though from the outset seems to be something that we're talking about a lot. Then that we don't want a mismatch between the player's expectation and what's going to happen in the game.
Yeah, and Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion, does that from the start. It's like, oh, I want to play a druid. Well, the dice said that you can't play a druid because you don't have stats enough to play the dice.
Right, and I think they changed that in like what, 3 or 4. Because I know originally it was like you rolled 3 d6s in a straight line, and that's determining everything.
Yeah. I mean, there are different ways. Like you can do average scores. Like, you could discuss with your DM, and your DM will say, yeah, you can have like 1 16, but you have to take 1 9, and everything else has to be average.
Like a standard array.
Right. And there are multiple ways to arrive at your stats. There are new ways constantly being discovered. But I just really, because a human being or an elf or a half orc or a dwarf, I don't care, can actually train their body to be better. They can train their mind to be better. I figure if I'm a 28-year-old druid and I've been training since I was 15, I should have the stats that I need to be a druid because I've been training my body like that. So like, I don't just the random stats to, quote unquote, account for the randomness of birth. It just feels like the game's fighting me. I just don't like it. It's absolutely miserable.
Why a lot of people say that point buy or standard array is basically the so-called true way of creating a character rather than 46 minus the lowest.
I like my favorite way of rolling up stats, because I like rolling up stats. I actually do like rolling up a character and seeing what you get. My favorite way is kind of a hybrid of point buy and rolling. You roll 76, you keep them all, and you assign them. All of your stats start at 8, and you assign them to the stats that you want, and you can't go over 18. So say if you had 2 6s, you couldn't assign both of those to one stat because that would put you at 20. So once the dice are rolled, they're static, and you just put them on each one of the attributes that you like. I find that it actually ends up very close to a standard array layout, because you'll usually end up with 1 15 or 16, or maybe even an 18, and 1 score or maybe 2 scores at 8, and kind of a spread in between.
I know I just said that it's miserable, but I mean, if you're walking into a game and you don't really know what you want to play and you want to just randomize stats and see what you can get away with, that's cool. That sounds fun. But if I have a character concept and I've written a backstory and I have this idea of what I want to do moving forward, it gets really frustrating really fast.
If you can't play it, well, that's what, especially if this is your I know that I'm for that too, especially if you don't get much table time, because a lot of people don't.
Or at least,
and so you come and you will want to play the X, and then you can't because you rolled badly. I'm not down with that.
Yeah, or at least something that is a level-less system like Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds being a classless, level-less system, not technically level-less, because you can have your levels, I guess, of experience. Your rookie, your novice, veteran, etc. Those kinds of levels of experience. But a classless system where you're free to use everything that's available and put it into your character makes that better.
Well, and if you're the one who wants to play the paladin, it doesn't matter if the paladins are really rare in the world.
Right.
But you're the one who's going to be playing it tonight. So go ahead and play. You're rare in the world, but go ahead and play tonight because you're the one who wants to play the paladin, and you only get to play once a month anyway. So play the paladin if that's what you want to play. Let's go. Like, that's my philosophy on that. All right. Is there anything else we need to cover? We've been going for a while here. Is there anything else anybody has to say on the subject before we wrap it up? Grimhild says, I love Call of Cthulhu and play the Cthulhu Masters tournament at Gen Con, but the raw system is very 1980s and not all that great. Well, when we were looking at the basic role-playing, like, we thought that the new edition was better than what they put out for the basic role-playing. Point Buy, Twincast is in favor of Point Buy. Point Buy is best because we don't have huge discrepancies in the parties. My problem with Point Buy, I say with that, my problem with Point Buy is that, like, GURPS, so theoretically GURPS is really even. Now, the downside is it takes a long time to make a character. But on the other hand, you don't know what the game master is really going to send you up against. So even though theoretically you're all equal at the beginning, well, if it happens to be that the game master has in mind doesn't involve 3/4 of your skills, it doesn't matter if you're theoretically an equal character because your skills just never came up. So theoretically, I really like the point buys, but in practice, I'm like, you can go to tremendous amount of trouble, like GURPS does, to try to balance all of the points. But then all that balance goes out the window as soon as the game starts, or could potentially go out the window.
Right, and
no plan ever survives in first contact with the enemy.
Right, and also, like how a lot of people say, rogues basically just break the game. Yes, they do, especially once they hit level 11. And depending on what feats they got, yeah, you basically say, okay, I roll the die. Well, die is still in hand. It's like, the worst I can do is like a 21. Do I still roll the die?
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the game I was in, is where I was playing a inquisitive rogue. So my character was basically the historian of the group. And literally the whole campaign was literally just my character taking the spotlight when not in combat.
Because you're the one who had all those non-combat stats. So that mattered, and so it was on you.
Yeah, I had history, investigation, and insight. So basically, I could tell, basically, if I rolled good enough, which unfortunately I had a die that, no, I did not make it a cheat die. It came unbalanced itself.
Well, okay, that's
a
different issue, though.
Yeah, so I had an unbalanced dice, so I would use that one a lot, just to add more, so that way I would always wind up with a 25 plus roll.
That's different than the point buy system, though.
Right.
Yeah, a little bit.
Even though I made my intelligence and wisdom 12, because I still had proficiency and I had a minimum requirement bonus that I had to always be at, it was like,
yeah, you couldn't roll less than 10. Yeah. Yeah, that's why, rogues are, what is it, a reliable talent?
Yes.
Yeah. Just, I have proficiency.
I have proficiency, I have expertise, I have reliable talent. Plus, I got feats that even add more bonus to it. It's like, do I even roll?
Yeah.
I had like a passive perception of like 21, and our druids didn't even have 18. So it's like, I'm kind of destroying your game.
Twincast says just needs a good GM. Random character generation has the same potential problems as the top on the top problems on top of inherent imbalance. And see, I agree with that because you can, like I said, you can spend a tremendous amount of time trying to balance all the points like in GURPS and spend a tremendous amount of time making characters, and you can still end up with imbalanced characters. Likewise, you can spend very little time making random PCs, and then playing, and you can still have the same problem. So that's why I've kind of moved away from complex point buy systems, because even though I love those and I still love GURP, so it's I still have that in my heart. But what Twincast says is exactly right, that both of them you can spend. So why spend the time? So that's why I'm trying to reduce the amount of time. Yeah. Grimhild says if you're trying to roll random characters, then go in with the expectation and then go with the flow. Build your character at the table. That's another way to do it. Like Fate is a lot like that.
Or slightly less freewheeling, but the same idea is employed by Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark games, where you have a set number of playbooks, and those are automatic. That's your. You don't have a whole bunch of random stats. You have a certain types of moves that you can do in the game system, and then your playbook gives you certain other types of moves to be your class or whatever. And there's no big swings of numbers.
Well, let's see. Mad says, I think we should go ahead and wrap up because we've done. I really appreciate you all being here, panel. I really enjoyed this. This was a fantastic conversation again. Mad 582 says, thanks, panel. Oh, and that Heath guy too. So thank you very much for being here, panel. This was great. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think this was a good night. Hopefully next Friday night we'll do dinner and a board game again. I'll be doing some Hero Quest because I'm really excited to play my elf again because the elf got some really amazing stuff. But I'm got all my paints and stuff sitting up here. So I did painting. So, but I thought this was great. I thought this was a really great conversation. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, panel. And also thank you for everybody who's been here in the chat. And thank you for everybody who comes along and watches in the on the replay. This was great. I will see everybody tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. Central again, the morning grind will be here. So until then, everybody have a wonderful evening. We will see you later. Bye, everybody.
Good night.